What's up? Good evening, and this is the Freakcast. We're excited. We're going to let you join in, and we're glad that you have tuned in with us tonight. And before we get started, we got a great guest tonight. I'm so excited about our guest tonight. Her name is Tennille. Can't wait to tell you more about her. But before we do that, let's play our theme song. Let people join in live if you'd like to, and we will get started here in about a minute.
There's no air in this room. I'm somewhere, lost my shoes. In this mind, you will see who you're really gonna be. Hollowed out, filled with sin. Keeping watch, I don't pretend. Feelings throw you to the ground. Pick it up and spin around. Stay true, I don't wanna be in this room. Stay true, I don't wanna be in this room.
Alrighty.
There's no air in this
Welcome to the Freakcast. We're so glad you've joined in with us. If you were joining us live, we're glad you joined in with the stream. And if you were listening later on YouTube, Spotify, or iTunes, we're glad you joined in as well. Super excited about having our guest on tonight. I'll get to that in just a second. That was our theme song, Stay True. And make sure you follow him. It's actually at Dawson Carroll, DawsonCarroll. You can follow him on Instagram, and you'll have more music coming up on iTunes and all the platforms, Spotify and everything as well. Just love the song. I talk about this all the time, but the idea just of staying true to who we are, what we're about, no matter what we're facing, no matter what we're going through, no matter what you're facing, no matter what you're going through, as difficult as it may be, staying true to who we are and being persistent, moving forward. That's what Fight Like a Freak is all about. This is the Freakcast, and my name is Stephen Carroll, and I guess I am the head freak, and I'm super glad that you have joined in with us. This whole deal is about sharing people's stories. It's about giving people a format to share their story. And I always tell people there's a verse that I love. It's in Revelations 12:11, and it is simply this. It says, they overcame the enemy by the power of the blood and the word of their testimony, their story. And no matter what faith you come from or where you are, this thing here, I'd encourage you to look this. It's in Revelations 12:11, because it's such a powerful moment. How that we overcome things in our life, we overcome struggles or whatever the case may be, and how powerful our stories are. Your story is powerful. Your testimony, what you've gone through, what you're going through. You know, we live in a day and age where there's what they call quote unquote influencers that are all over social media. And a lot of those influencers are, those kids work hard. They do a lot of things, right? But people that, as we go through things and we move through life, we have opportunities to grow and develop and to learn. And the people that can impact our life are people that have gone through things maybe that we are facing, have experienced things that maybe we're facing, and then we can learn from them. That is the case with our guest tonight. I consider Tennille a mentor to me because of what she went through, and we're going to get to that in just a minute. So let me bring her on. This is her. Tennille, welcome to the Freakcast. We're glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm glad
So
to be
excited
here.
to have you. Yeah, I'm so excited that you're here. I mean, so you were such a huge, and we'll get to this in a second, right? But you were such a big part of my journey because after I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, and then I was going through my treatment, and I realized I was having a stem cell transplant, and then remembering and us communicating that you had a stem cell transplant. And so, man, you just made such an impact just talking to you for a long time, and kind of you giving me the idea of what I was going to look, what I was going to face. And
hmm
consider you went through it 20 years ago, 22 years ago. you know? It was just a big deal to me. Real big deal. So thank you.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it just asking me the questions this far down the road, it was like, one, I was in shock for you. And then just knowing that it's been that long, and then somebody that I knew during that time and saw me, during that process, just being able to answer that for you, and hopefully being as honest as I could be about it, because there's no sugarcoating what was going to be happening. So,
Right. And it was because, just little things that you told me, like, I didn't, you don't know because you have no immune system. And so that's the freaky thing in the first place, and you were just telling me things like, hey, you know what? It was 20 years ago and my kids came in and people, she climbed all over me and, they let people in my room. And of course, that was pre COVID days, but even when I got in, it gave me a little more peace to know that, hey, you know what? This is doable.
yeah,
I mean, if you did it 22 years ago, surely I can do it in 2022.
yeah,
So
you
it made a
definitely,
big difference. Yeah, it made a big difference
definitely.
because you had been there, right? And
Hmm.
so, I mean, it was a long time. We'll get to that in a second. So I was thinking, we were talking earlier about how the first time that we met, and what's weird is we met, I mean, in the middle of kind of all that was going on. I think I was coming here, we got here in year 2000, right?
Yeah,
So you were 23, I guess, at that point.
yeah. And I had,
Is that
well, yeah, yeah, yep. And so I was it was before my transplant. So right before my transplant
right?
in
Yeah.
'02, not too long before that. And I remember you guys coming, because was it you or Brother Donnie that came? It was Brother Donnie that came first,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Donnie came first, and
Yeah.
if you guys don't know, Donnie is he's a mentor of mine that I knew when I was a teenager. He was my youth pastor in my life, and then he had come to Forney the year before I got here, and then he called me and said, "Hey, you got to come take a look at this," and they, just what's going on, and there was an opportunity for me to be involved, and so that's how we got here. Was through that conversation. So yeah, he came first, and then
I
I
can
came, I think, a
literally
year later.
remember the first time I met you and Donna. So I was working, that's when my niece and nephew, or my niece was in the youth, and well, niece and nephew. But I remember we were in a little real small building, and I remember you and Donna coming in, and y'all stepped up onto the little makeshift stage that they had in that building. And I'm a big time music lover, and so we all loved what Donnie was doing already at the church. And then you guys got there and started working with the youth, and I'm like, this couple, both of them are musically talented. I was in awe. Like, I will never forget it. I will never forget Donna sitting down at the keyboard and playing, and you getting up there, and whatever kids, you guys had already put up there with y'all to, kind of start
Yeah,
worship. And I was just, it was amazing. I was like, I mean, I never forgot it. So,
that's crazy. Yeah, and I think and when you get there, of course, we're trying to get to know everybody and
mhm.
trying to connect or whatever. But that little room you're talking about, that's where there's a pizza place there now,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
but I will never forget it because it was just that one little room, and we'd have to vacuum that thing, and it smelled like dead cricket. It smelled like dead crickets because there was crickets everywhere. I'd never seen so many
I didn't
freaking crickets in
experience
my
that,
life.
thank goodness.
Yeah, it was insane. And then your niece Courtney is just incredible. I just loved her, still
Yes.
do. And then Colton, I haven't talked to Colton in forever.
Yeah.
But yeah, they
He's.
were here, and Lori and just the whole clan.
Hmm.
And it was an interesting season, right? But what's weird to me is that you're going through all this stuff, and I remember prayer requests and people talking about what you were going through, but at the same time, it's like it was just now 22 years later, all that stuff is what you were going through at the time,
Hmm.
and I wasn't fully aware of all of it.
And you
Exactly.
can't be until you're going through it. I mean, you can to a point, unless you're the relative and watching this happen. And
Right.
I could feel that when you were asking me questions, and you brought up things that you remembered about, prayers for me, and it was just, and I know, like, you have no clue until you're going through it.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I think that it's um I don't know, it just makes such a big difference. But just to have the experience, and to have, I mean, not that you want that experience, right?
No. Yeah.
But it definitely made a difference. But you're just so you know, like your family and and just you guys were such a big part of our lives in the beginning, whether you knew it or not,
Mhm.
and just the engagement and all that kind of stuff. But then realizing that, I mean, literally 2 years after I got there, then all this started. But I kind of wanted you to just kind of go through your story, because one of the things that we really want to do is give people the opportunity to, to share their story. And we talked about that a while ago. I mean, giving people a foundation or just a format to be able to share their story ultimately. And
Mhm.
so I don't know, tell everybody kind of where it all started and kind of just from the beginning, and then we kind of bounce it off from there.
Yeah, and when I've shared it since I had my transplant at 25, I give kind of an outline, and there's a few people I've shared some of the, more intense details of it, but never have I really talked about it to people like the whole entire process. And then of course people that
Right.
knew me, they knew parts of those process, but and it's different because like I see people like you and other people that I've seen that have lived a healthy life, and then bam, this ends up in their lives, and it's like I can understand the trauma of that, and my story's different than that. It didn't affect me any, less obviously the illness part, but I literally since I was born, the day I was born, I was sick. I had autoimmune issues my entire life. I spent probably since I was 2 weeks old, every year of my life, I was in the hospital for at least a month, entire, all the way to high school. And I went to on different immune doctors. I was at Scottish Rite, at Children's my entire life. Like they never knew what in the world was wrong with me. They tested me multiple times for, I mean, I was having weird things like ulcers in my intestines, just really weird autoimmune issues. They tested
Yeah.
me for Lyme's disease. They tested me for lupus, all types of things like that. I tested negative always. Seventh
Now, would it
grade,
go? Would it kind of be up and down like for like you? I mean, I know you're just talking about seventh grade, but like from the time you were born, was it like you were sick and you get better and you get sick and you get better? Was it kind of an up and down thing like that, or
it
was it just
was
like a
Well, like it was the same symptoms over and over and over. So the ulcers, that was a huge thing
right?
for me. And I would get sick really easy. I mean, I would have pneumonia multiple times a year. I'd have like it would always be stuff like that. It wouldn't be some um not a lot of new things. It was just the same thing
Same
my
things
entire life.
recurring.
So people that I grew up with, that they only knew like if they were my friends, they knew that I was sick, but nobody thought of me as sick because I was in and out of the hospital and I'd come back and nobody even knew I was sick unless they asked me or they were like, where were you? But but I was so used to it. And that's kind of how it led up to um, seventh grade. I remember the very beginning of whenever early, volleyball tryouts are always the beginning of the school year. So
Yeah.
I was trying out for volleyball at the time. Had played soccer and that was it. And everywhere I was hitting the ball, like I was getting these knots just popping up all over me, my ankles, and I couldn't even walk by the end of the tryouts. And they rushed me to the emergency room. They had no clue. They were like, "We have no idea what's going on with your body." So very next day, I go to Scottish Rite, and that's when, by about 10 in the morning, every day, I was not able to walk because I had these knots, random knots all over my feet, my legs. Sometimes my arm wouldn't open, my leg wouldn't open, or I couldn't close it. My fingers would close up like this. And I was homebound. So I had a teacher that year at my house, seventh grade. And it gradually got better, the symptoms of that. I still have that same problem today. And I was only diagnosed in 2009 with what they think it
Okay.
is. And it's just an autoimmune reaction to the allergies, basically, that people suffer in the air. Like I suffer too, but I start attacking my own cells. And that's the nodules that I get as they burst. It is crazy. It is nuts. So
Yeah.
There's nothing to do for it other than take like steroids and things like that, or just I'm on a lot of allergy medicine, and it's just weird. But I went back to school 8th grade. I gradually got better. All of my stuff started getting better. Just general symptoms. I was getting pneumonia less. I was getting, just illnesses less. But probably around, I moved from Mesquite. I grew up in Mesquite, and then I moved to Cedar Hill the end of my 10th grade year. And around 11th grade, I started getting new symptoms, and I started getting a lot of fluid around my heart and my lungs. And so they thought I had pleurisy. They thought I had pericarditis. And then one night I was rushed to the hospital because I was like out with my friends and started having chest pains real bad. And they took me to the hospital and then ended up keeping me. This was my senior year, kept me in the hospital for a month and came in and did every test you can imagine, because they said basically I had fluid around all of my organs, and they didn't know why. And they had never seen that. And this was at Charlton Methodist in Duncanville. And they had done so many tests on me. And the last one they had done was an extract from my back from my lungs and the fluid and everything. Horrible test. Like, it was definitely one of the most painful things I had been through. And they still
was it like a so what was it, like a bone marrow test?
No, that one wasn't. But that's what they ended up doing after that. So
Right.
they came in for that. And like I said, I had never had that. It was horrible needle, come in and they did
Yeah,
through the tissue in my back, and they were extracting whatever fluid was there.
Oh.
So like I said, I had been through, like, needles didn't bother me, nothing. I had been through it a million times, but not that test. And so it was tough. I remember being in that hospital because that's when the whole Nancy Kerrigan and what's her name were in the Olympics, and she like beat her knee.
What was that?
So,
What was that? Well, I think too, that's the thing. Like, I'm sitting here thinking, what was her name? Oh, it was Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding.
Yeah, Tony Harding.
Yeah. If you're listening, like, anybody, yeah, we're old school.
Myself, yes.
That's old school. Yeah.
So I was 1994.
But you know what though? Yeah. So 1994. I mean, because Don and I got married in 91, and so, so you were a senior in high school, like when this happened.
So this was because I started getting new symptoms.
Yeah. So how was that? Because I've known you to always be super active. I mean, you're a police officer, and you know what I'm saying, like, but those. I mean, talk about, before we move on with the story, like growing up as a kid and a teenager and having to battle, and of course, you moved schools a couple times there, but what was that like? I mean,
it did not stop me. I had, as soon as I start talking about my mom, it's gonna make me cry, but I literally had the most supportive mom and loving, and my family. I mean, my sisters, everybody. My mom is a very optimistic person, and never, ever, ever once, because there were plenty of times I can remember crying to her, as a child, and being sad and crying and breaking down and saying, there'd be something at church that I couldn't go to because I was too sick, and I was always sick, always. And so,
yeah,
but she was scared to death, because the second I could be still running a low fever, but I would change, I'd get up and start running around the house, and she'd be like, whoa, wait, you got to stay down. I'm like, nope, I'm not staying down. And so I had to literally convince her to get to do certain things, because she was scared for me, obviously, because I wasn't well yet, but I just fought it until I could do it. And then she always let me just go ahead and try, no matter what it was. I played soccer since I was 4 years old. And I think only during middle school, when I had that other problem so bad, was the only time I had to really back off of sports. As soon as I got better in 9th grade, I started back in high school soccer, played all through high school. And, I just had to really communicate with my coaches and let them know I'm a weirdo. And so I might not be able, if I say I can't play this game, I'm not like trying to chicken out of anything. Like, I can't play. So it was a big communication thing. And as long as I knew I could do it, I would do it. Like, it was not going to stop me. And so
yeah,
it was tough, at certain times. I think my senior year was the toughest, because there were quite a few things. I started getting worse, my symptoms of whatever was going on, and I couldn't do a lot of things. And I went through a slight state of depression during that time. And it's really one of the only times I can pinpoint where I could say, yeah, for sure, I was not me. And my mom recognized it, and she would just be like, "What is going on?" Like, and it wasn't. We had not. None of us had really been through anything as far as depression around that time. So up to that point, like we didn't, and it wasn't talked about as much, and the symptoms of what that looks like and things like that. So it was just kind of like, what is going on? Well, obviously, she knew I was having a hard time, but it was different for me. She had never seen me like kind of be like, down like that. So
Right.
that month in the hospital, again, I had support from family and my friends. They would all come see me. I had teachers come see me. Like I've always had that support because I genuinely like people and like have always tried to, make those friendships happen. So after that test, I pulled my mom in and I was just like, Mom, I cannot do another test, because they're sitting there saying, we still have no idea what's wrong with you. I mean, it's autoimmune. That's all they ever wrote it off to, was autoimmune. And they didn't have any tests that came back and showed anything else. So
Yeah.
that moment for me in the hospital was hard. And my grandma was still alive at that time. And they came in, I think that same day I had that extract from my back. They said, hey, an oncologist came in, and his name was Dr. Cox. And he was like, hey, we've got one more test that we want to do. And it basically tells us everything about your immune system. I had no clue what that meant. And he said, it's a bone marrow extract, and we'll get it from your hip. And it is, he was very honest. He was like, it is can be a very painful procedure. And I was just like, no. And I've never said no. I mean, like I said, I've never been scared to face any of it. I just did it. And this time I was just like, no, I really don't want to do it. Do I have to do this? And he's like, well, it's the only way we'll be able to really tell, what's going on. I was like, when? And he's like, well, tomorrow night is when I want to do it. I was terrified. I was, for the first time, scared of anything that they were going to do. And we used to joke about my grandma having like a red phone to God, because like every prayer that she asked, it was answered. So I was like, okay, so we need to get on the phone with my grandma. So I remember my mom being in the room with me, and she had gone to work that same day, and then came back to the hospital and basically told me that, she had talked to a few people at work about it. And there were actually some people who knew about that test and expressed to her that it was worse than childbirth. And so for the first time, she asked me if she could let my sister Lori be in the room with me, that she just didn't know if she could watch it. And I was just like, okay. So we had called my grandma. And like I said, I was like, that morning of it, I was still very anxious, nervous. I called my grandma, and she prayed with me, and she called her prayer group that she met with every week. And she said, we're going to be praying for you, to just be ready. And so I took a nap for about 3 hours. And when I woke up, it was like none of that was there. Not a single bit of fear was there. None of it. And I was ready. And I said, okay, let's do this. Let's get it done. Doctor comes in. Lori stays in there with me. I probably almost broke her hand, because I've learned to this date that it depends on who's doing it, how it feels. So not a good experience. That was the first time I had that done. And when they got the test back, it was, all my counts were normal. They had I think my white count was maybe elevated a little bit, but other than that, they had no answers. And they literally said, you got my first name's Natalie, and I go by my middle Tennille. And they were like, this is Natalie disease, because we don't know. And so that's how they left it. And that was in 1994.
So that was the bone marrow. So the bone and the test you're talking about is the bone marrow aspiration, which is where they put the needle in. That is a
Yes.
yeah, I had that done as well, and it is a horrible. And I've always told people that have had that same thing done. I can't imagine like you know kids and children that have leukemia and have
Mhm.
these have to have those multiple times. Of course, I think now they'll put them to sleep too, but still, nonetheless, I mean, I don't know if they, I don't know. I just know it's painful.
Oh,
But
I'll never forget. I mean, I
yeah,
was
yeah,
jerking my hip, my body all over the place, and
yeah.
I was like, "What
It
in the
was
world?"
awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I held the.
So,
I had a nurse. There was a nurse, Alicia. She was in there, and I know I squeezed her hand. It's way too tight. But and
yeah, I
then
remember
Donna,
Lori
she's back.
telling me.
Donna's back there watching it. She thought it was the coolest thing she ever seen in her life. And I'm like, well, I'm glad you're enjoying it. It
She
was
should have been a
because
doctor.
it sucked. But so they get because and the thing is that so that's basically that reads that's your whole your immune system and everything is out of your bone marrow.
Yep.
It's
That's
where
when I
your
learned
stem
that. I
cell your
didn't know
stem
that.
cells, yeah. And so if you guys listen or watching, that's a huge deal because you can tell so much about what's going on. And so even after they did that, they still didn't know exactly what was causing all of your issues.
Nope. And so basically, all they did at that point was treat the symptoms, which was the fluid, around my organs. And they gave me whatever medications they may give you for pleurisy and pericarditis, which is just, the fluid around those organs. They treated that, put me on high dose of steroids, which I had been on hundreds of times throughout my life. And I mean, those ulcers that I would get in my intestines, they'd put me on a steroid pack, and things like that. Um, the so they released me from the hospital, and I finished out my senior year, doing much better after that. After they got all that cleared up, my symptoms were less and less.
Well,
Um,
what'd they clear up?
the fluid, because
Oh,
that's the
okay.
pain. So they were trying to help the pain that I was in because it hurt.
Okay.
If I
Okay.
breathed, it was hurting. That's the chest pains I was having, is when that
Yeah.
fluid would actually rub against each other, and that's why you hurt when you have those problems. Is
Right.
that fluid, and it bumps into your organs, and so it's painful. Um,
And I think we have to go back to the fact that this is all happening while you're a child and a teenager and you're trying to grow. You know what I'm saying? You got all these other things in life that you have to deal with, and so many kids and stuff that deal with illness and have to deal with stuff like this. On top of course, it's 22 years ago, but still, nonetheless, it's life and liking and and relationships and trying to grow up and all that stuff, and it's everything that's going on, in your life. But I think one of the things, and I don't know, and we've talked about this a little bit. I'm asking you, but just kind of looking back on that, it's the experiences that we have. It's not what happens to you; it's how you respond to what happens to you, and the support system you had, and the people around you, and that believed with you had to have made a big difference in your life in the midst of all that, right?
100%. I mean, like I said about the whole red phone to God. I mean, my grandma, she lived a believer's life. It wasn't. I don't know if it was that generation, and especially where she was at, she had 9 kids, and um,
Wow.
yeah, and so my mom's the youngest of those, and she, I know growing up, we always went to church when I was little, and then some things happened in my family, and that really got my mom in a bad place, with God allowing basically these things to happen. Um, and she, got turned away from wanting to go to church, but she never discouraged us. And I didn't know any of that was going on whatsoever. I just knew my mom was working a lot more, and that was all I knew in my head. And she was like, "Okay, y'all go to church, still with grandma." And then once I got a little bit older, and I said I wanted to go with some friends from school, I started going with a girl at school. And so after that point, it was kind of like if we went to church, we went with our friends and went on our own. And she encouraged every bit of that, and always prayed with us. And my grandma
So as they say,
always,
it wasn't that she quit. It's not like she quit believing
right.
as far as her faith, right?
No, no, she did not quit believing. She was more, it was almost a whatever the period of years were that I was not aware
Right.
of what happened.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
She
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
mad.
And
She
that's,
was
yeah.
upset. She was upset with God. And then
Sure.
by the
Yeah.
time but she knew that as I started getting worse, that the worst thing she could do is stay turned away from his word. And she was in his word at that point. She just was not able to go to church, I think. I
No.
think that's just
Yeah.
my assumption is that I
Well, and I
think
think we talk about this all the time. I mean, it's like, um, faith and believing and family, those are the things that are a priority, and I think
Mhm.
sometimes in our lives, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I think like just looking at the situation from the outside looking in, it's like you're at this point where you have a daughter that, this has this illness, you're not sure what's going on. You have these other circumstances in your life that you're dealing with, and you're trying to navigate all that. And yeah, there's, I've talked to a guy that was on here, a while back. His name's David, and um, they lost their daughter at 14, and he's frustrated with the whole situation, and that's totally okay. It's like,
Well,
I mean, God doesn't shy away from that at all. He welcomes the opportunity to be available in the midst of our confusion, to be available in the midst of our discouragement, to be available in the midst of our anger. And so, well, church is a great thing for community and connecting with people and all kinds of neat stuff. Faith is developed in ways that we become stronger through situations, and
mm,
so yeah, I mean, still believing in the midst of the confusion and the pain and the anger is is part of the journey, I think, and I
yeah,
think,
definitely.
it makes a big deal because I will sometimes connect those things with certain organizations or whatever, and it's more about what we believe in our hearts and what we do in our family, and sometimes it's those are seriously important, so she was
Mhm.
still there, right? Even though she was struggling, she was still there
Oh
right
yeah.
beside
I
your
mean,
side. Yeah.
like I said, at the time, I only know those things after I became older and found out those things were going
Right.
on. Never ever did I pick up on her being upset with things that had happened
Right.
and it
That's
having
awesome.
anything to do with her faith. I had no
Yep.
clue. I mean,
Yep.
she was always there. She was always, and so it was, I mean, I know for a fact, like I wouldn't have had the experience I had if I had not had been raised in that atmosphere.
Right. Exactly.
And I mean, and it was definitely wasn't perfect. I mean, that my dad and her got a divorce when I was 9, and he was, he was could be not a nice man, and but loved me. I know he loved me, but he only knew how to love us the way that he knew how to love us, and it was not, not great at times. And
Right.
so, but he was always there. So she was, by the time I was in high school, Lori was out of the house and gone and stuff. And then me and Tanya were at home, and she finished out her years at North Mesquite. And then I had gone to Cedar Hill and went my last 2 years there. And so, up to this point, really, I didn't even think about it. Like I said, my senior year is kind of when it affected me more because I was older and wanting to do things that I couldn't do. I mean,
Right.
and that's really all it came down to was I would occasionally have a pity party in my room with myself. And if my
Of
mom
course.
caught
Yeah.
it, if my mom caught it, but otherwise my friends never knew. I mean, like they knew I was sick, but there was not one time I ever went to a friend's house and cried to them about what I was going through. I don't think. I
Right.
don't remember it if I did. So because that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted, if I was out or getting to be with my friends and getting to do something I didn't normally get to do, I was gonna make the best of it. And that was what it was going to be. And I wasn't going to ruin it with what I might not get to do tomorrow. I just couldn't think
Yeah.
like that. It was day to day, and I try to enjoy each day. And
Wow. That's
all
good.
of that does lead up to the rest of it for sure, because I graduated in 94, and then that summer immediately started some semesters at Cedar Valley Junior College, and then took some classes at Mountain View, and I started playing soccer for Mountain View, and stayed there a couple of semesters. And then in 97 into 96, And so from 94 until 97, I didn't have to go to the hospital not one time. And
Hmm.
I was doing really good. And then I started I was working at a bank in 96 in Duncanville. And I was working the counter at night through the night. And I started getting, my nose started bleeding out of nowhere. I'd never had a nosebleed in my life. And it happened probably like 5 or 6 times in about a month period. And I'm just like, what in the world? I mean, it wouldn't stop. And I would just keep doing that. And then it would finally stop and I'd move on and whatever. No other symptoms of anything else. I went to the doctor and he was just like, yeah, I don't know, what's going on. And as long as it doesn't continue, then, and it stopped. So then I enrolled at North Texas and moved up there with my friend Amy. We got an apartment. I started going to University of North Texas. And I was working at a Denton Area Teachers Credit Union there while I was going to school there. I was playing soccer. And it was right about that time. So I was never a big fan of school. And I think it was because I had to work so hard to catch up all the time.
Yeah, because you're behind because of being sick or whatever.
My entire life, life, it was a struggle for me. I mean, if I put any effort into it, I made A's and B's, C's here and there, but it was just a lot of work. And I'm definitely the procrastinator and things like that. So it doesn't help. So
yeah, me too.
yeah, I have to like come up with different, I'm better now, but so I was going to school there, and that time of my life, I was really into hanging out with my friends who I'd been friends with, and I'm still friends with to this day. And I was very much in that scene, of going out and stuff on the weekends, and really just started getting kind of disgusted with school and no motivation. And I'd always wanted to be a police officer. And I was like, why am I going? Well, since I was about 15, I knew I wanted to be a police officer. And so I was like, you know what, why am I doing this? Like, not everyone has to go to college, like to get
Right.
what they want in life. And I really want to be a police officer. And so I actually finished out that semester, and, I expressed to my mom. And of course, my mom was just like, okay, I just want you to make sure you know what you're doing. I was like, yeah, I'm going to start looking into testing for police departments. And so I actually drove to Dallas and went to DPD headquarters, which I think was on like Main Street at the time, and went in there, picked up an application, filled that out. And this was 1997. And towards the end of 1997, and then moved back. And I moved in with my grandma and my aunt in Pleasant Grove and said, hey, can I stay here until I figure out what I'm going to do? And then I met Lexi's dad at the same time, and, fell in love, met the man of my dreams, and we fell in love. And then I began the DPD process. And during that process, I'd gotten a part-time job as like a call center or something with my best friend, Laura. And I had laryngitis. 2 days after I started that job, I got laryngitis, like no voice whatsoever. I had it for 2 weeks and it would not go away. And this was early 98. Or I guess towards the end of February. And so 2 weeks drug on and into March of 1998. And I'm like, what in the world? And the only other symptoms I had, I noticed when I'd go out to my parents and I'd go up their stairs, my heart would I could feel my heart beat in my throat, and I would get kind of like dizzy. And I was like, oh, why do I feel like this? And anytime I said anything like that in front of my mom, she's like, Tennille, have you been to the doctor? She's like, I'm worried about you. She did tell me multiple times how pale I looked and that she was afraid I was anemic because I'd had anemia here and there. And she was just like, your lips look really gray. Like you don't look well. And I'm like, oh, I'll be fine. Like that's always how I did, because I was used to running on empty so much. It was just like, okay, I'll get over it. I'll be better. And so when the laryngitis happened and it wouldn't go away, I was like, okay, I got to figure out what in the world's going on. So I go to my doctor's office that was in Duncanville, and I go in there, and he normally didn't do blood work in his office. They send you to a lab. And I walked in, and he walked in, and he was like, Tennille, like, you look really, really anemic, and I really want to get some blood work on you right now. I was like, okay. So he goes, does blood work. I drove myself to the doctor. I was up there, and he, once they get the blood results back, like did it immediately. And he's like, hey, what have you been doing, for about the last 6 months? I was like, well, I just came back from going to North Texas, and I was playing soccer, and I'm working 2 jobs, and I'm applying for DPD. And he's like, well, did you drive yourself here? And so I'm like, what in the world why is he saying this? Like,
Yeah.
what's going on? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, I feel okay. He asked me if I'd been feeling bad. I told him the only symptoms I had, my voice was kind of coming back, but I was like, I can't talk real good right now. And he was like, well, you have about a third of the blood you should have in your body right now. I said, what? And he's like, honestly, you shouldn't even be able to walk across the street right now. Like, I don't know how you have any color right now at all. I was like, well, what does that mean? He's like, well, I don't know for sure, but I really want to send you up the street to over by Charlton Methodist to the oncology center. I had no idea what oncology was. I was like, okay. He said, well, I want you to see Dr. Cox. And I know you saw him in 94. I was like, oh yeah, I remember him. He did some horrible tests to me. And he's like, yeah, I really need you to go down there and see him. And I really think you need a blood transfusion like right now. I said, okay. It's like, all right. He goes, okay, so you're sure you can drive? I mean, that's how adamant he was. And I was like, yes, like I feel almost fine. Like I'm good, other than just feeling like drained. He's like, okay, we'll go down there right now. I'm calling them, let you know you're coming. I was like, okay, go down there. Nurses come out, and it's kind of a smaller place. And they're like, hey, come back here. Dr. Cox will be back here in a minute. We're going to go ahead and start setting up your transfusion. We'll start IV. I'm like, okay. And so I call my mom, and I'm like, hey, just let you know, like, I'm over here with Dr. Cox, and he's about to see me, the one that saw me in 94. And she remembers everything. I mean, just like you would with your own kid, you remember everything the doctor says, every appointment, everything. And they pull me in there, and he comes, and she's like, what, are you okay? And I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but they said that I had a third of blood I should have in my body. And so
That's crazy.
yeah. And she's like, well, just call me back. I'm like, I will. So Dr. Cox comes in, and he's like, hey, so they just sent over your blood results, and, it's pretty concerning. But before we make any assumptions, we want to get you this blood. You'll be feeling a lot better here in a little bit. They start the blood. He comes in, 45 minutes later. I already felt like a new person. Like I couldn't believe it. I just thought I was running on low, and he comes in, and he's like, hey, I want you to go to, it was a Friday, because he wanted me to go to Medical City the next day over the weekend over a Forest Lane. And he said, I want you to go to this floor and see these people, and they're going to run some more tests. And then when you come back on Monday, we'll go over what we think is going on. And I'm like, okay, what do you think's going on? And he's like, I was like, just tell me, like, just tell me. And he's like, okay. And I was like, I'll tell you. He said, well, just from the counts that you have, like, there's about 3 possibilities that we're looking at. He's like, one being leukemia. I'm like, okay. I knew that was not good. And then he said another type of cancer. I don't remember what he said. All I heard was the leukemia, and then whatever it was. And then he said, or a non-cancerous blood disease called aplastic anemia. And we'll go into those once we find out what's going on. I'm like, okay. So have to call my mom, tell her, and she's like, okay, well, me and your dad will be on the way, my stepdad. And so she comes out. We go to Medical City over the weekend. I go back on Monday. And oh, I completely skipped something. So during the time that I was saying I was at North Texas and just completely feeling blah about everything, I knew at 12 years old what happened to me when I accepted Christ in my heart. And I didn't have a lot of friends when I was in high school that were Christians or active Christian, going to church and doing things like that. And I would just randomly go visit a church when I was in high school, like by myself. And I tell my mom,
Mm.
like, I know I need to go to church. And I would just pop in some church in Cedar Hill and go to church by myself. And they'd always be welcoming and be like, oh, glad you visited, and I knew the tug that I felt, and would just get on my knees at any altar call they had. I was at it. I mean, it was like,
Yeah.
by myself, always. It was always by myself.
Yeah.
My friends used to tease me because they're like, Tennille, I would go see a movie by myself. They were like, you just do stuff by yourself. I'm like, I don't know. I don't think it's a big deal. Like, I'll just do it. I mean, they always picked on me for it. And so it was the same thing with church, because I just knew I was not doing what I was supposed to be doing. Even though I wasn't doing like outrageous things, I was not living a believer's life. And whenever I made that decision about school and I was so unhappy with my life, Lori, my oldest sister, was really seeking God on her own and had completely changed her life, and said, oh, well, I have a book that you will love and I want you to read it. And she handed me a book I think it's called Grace, Grace and More Grace by Joyce Meyer. I'm not a reader. Up to that point, I'd maybe read 3 books in my entire life. And
Yeah.
so she gave me that book. I read that book. And from that moment on, it was about 3 months before I got out of school and moved back. And I started backing off from my friendships, not in a negative way. I just kept sharing with them, saying, listen, I'm not going to be going out with y'all. I really need to change some things. I'm unhappy where I'm at right now. They were awesome. They supported me. They understood. They didn't hold that against me whatsoever. They didn't feel judged by it, I don't think. And so I was just like, I just know I'm not living the way I'm supposed to, and that God's really speaking to me about my life. This was all 6 months prior to my diagnosis. It started that process. And so I started going to church on my own, and I met Lexi's dad, and he was going through the same thing spiritually. And so we both started turning our lives over to the Lord at the same time. And I had never listened to Christian music in my life. I didn't even know that DC Talk existed. And he was all into that. And so that started me that was what started me into Christian music. And so
Yeah.
everything to that point, I mean, that was a life I had never experienced and lived, even though I knew I was a believer, and I knew what the power of God felt like, and that the Holy Spirit is. So at that moment of knowing this is going on, I know just up to that point that I wasn't like freaking out or anything like that. I was just like, okay, give me the information. I need to know what in the world is talking about. So when I
So
went
you're
back,
and you were I've always said this too. I'm not to interrupt you, but one of the things I've always said is, and believe, was that I'm thankful for who I was becoming before I was diagnosed. And that's kind of what I hear you saying. It's like, it's almost like this was coming in 6 months and you made this decision. And so you could kind of say the same thing. I'm thankful that I was becoming and moving that direction before I got the diagnosis. It's almost like you're being prepared, for what was to come, I guess, to some degree. Is that true? Or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I'll reveal it like in a second. And that's why I was like, wait, I just skipped over the one of the biggest parts I've ever shared of my
That's a
testimony
big deal.
was that right there.
Yeah.
It's been so long. You got to give my old brain time. And I'm just like, and my mom knows it, and my family knows it, because they saw what it was for me going through it. So up to that point, yes, definitely 100%. Nobody, I mean, it's almost like a movie when I think of it. Like, there's movies now where you see those things happen, and you see somebody being prepared for this big moment in their life and how they got to face it, and the strength that only God can give you during that time. And so when I went back on that Monday with my mom, I go in there and he sits down with us and he gets real close to me, and my mom's over on this side and I'm right here. Doctor comes up and he rolls his chair up in front of me. He's like, okay, so we are pretty positive about what's going on with you. And we believe you have something called aplastic anemia. I said, okay, what is that? And he said, well, you're basically, your bone marrow is made up of your white count platelets and red blood cells. And your bone marrow has apparently stopped making the red blood cells. And that's what aplastic anemia is.
Oh, wow.
Like, okay.
Now, was
So
did that, and you may say, if I'm interrupting you, tell me, but was that part of the problem all along? Was that you had this condition?
we don't know, because when he did that extract in 94, the bone marrow in 94, it did not show up as anything wrong. So I have no idea.
Yeah.
And when you find out about aplastic anemia, there are only a few things that they can pinpoint that could cause it, but
Yeah.
are not really able to narrow it down. Some can be genetic, some exposure to certain chemicals and pesticides, and some due to medications, multiple medications that you've been on in your life. Well, I was on so many medications, and eventually they went back and looked at my medical records, and they can't really pinpoint it to that either. So
Yeah.
we don't know. I mean, it can be exposure to radiation. It can be, that's the only things they know that causes aplastic anemia.
Huh.
And so he tells me that.
Crazy.
I know. So, and you know what, at that point, like, there have been so many things in my life that the doctors have dealt with, and still to this day, they're like, wow, I've never seen this before. I'm like, that's the story of my life. Like, okay, I know. Thank you. You're welcome. Like, I'm one of your research rats.
I'm
So
glad I could assist you with your research
I'm
and
telling you, literally, like
new frontiers.
3 months ago, I went to a new doctor and was telling him stuff, and he's like, "What?" I mean, he's like, I've never heard of this. You've got this," and then I'm like, I know. So, this was a big moment for me, because it's the whole realization of what the 6 months leading up to this meant. And the doctor looks at me and he's like, so basically, we think it's completely stopped because of how low your count is, and for you to be at this level, he's like, and my mom she is not moving a muscle, and I can feel her like kind of looking at me out of the side of her eye, and the doctor's just talking to me, and I'm like, okay. And he's like, basically, your body's been dying for about 4 months. I'm like, okay, so what do we do now? And he said,
Yeah, I was fixing that. Okay, so what do we do?
yeah, he goes, he looked at me and he was like, Tennille, he's like, did you hear what I just said? I'm 21,
22?
and
21?
yeah, I'm 21. No, I'm 22. Yeah, I'm 22. And I was like, I heard you. He said, well, I just told you that you are dying and you are smiling at me. I was like, I didn't realize I was smiling, but I just am like, what do we do? He said, no, I will never forget you. He said, I will never forget walking into the hospital room when I saw you at Charlton Methodist in 1994. I mean, he had dates. He knew exactly. He was like, I'll never forget walking in there and talking to you and seeing all these things that you've been through your whole life. And never once did you not smile at me while I was in that room. And he's like, and now you're looking at me the same way. And I just told you you're dying. I'm like, listen, okay. And then I look at my mom and I see her eyes like watering, and I'm just like, and then my eyes start watering. I go, okay. So, okay. So
I get it.
Now, now what?
This isn't good.
Like,
what do I do?
Yeah. So he said, well, you need a bone marrow transplant ASAP. I'm like, he's like, but what I'm going to do is I'm referring you to Baylor Oncology in Dallas. And you've got an appointment tomorrow with Dr. Pinero. I remember his name, and I'm like, okay. And he's like, so you'll go there tomorrow. They'll be looking at all our results, and they're going to want to do. Oh, so when I went in for the blood that I got that day on Friday, when they sent me over to get the transfusion, the day that he looked at everything, he said, and remember that bone marrow extraction I did in 94, we need to do that again. And I said, this is when I drove there by myself. And I said, okay, when? And he said, now.
Now.
So I
Yeah,
was
this
there
is
by
coming.
myself. I'm like, I don't guess I have time to call my grandma on her prayer group, but okay.
Yeah.
So he did one right there in his office that day. And that's
Yeah.
what they sent over. That's what they looked at over the weekend. And then I went to Medical City and then went back on Monday. He said, so we're sending all this over to Baylor Oncology and you'll meet with him tomorrow. So me and my mom leave there and she's just, I can't even remember after that. Like, I don't remember anything in the car. I don't remember anything else until the next day when we go to the hospital. And that doctor had some emergency he had to fly out of the country for. And so they put me with a different oncologist, and his name is Dr. Agura, and he's retired now from there. But when I went in there to meet him, he was like the most laid back human being I've ever met in my entire life, which was awesome because for the most part, I'm pretty laid back and I like directness. If I'm doing something wrong, tell me. If I need to do something, tell me. And so we go in there and he starts talking to me about everything. My mom's in there, my whole family's with me. And he said, I said, well, the other doctor, said that, hey, I need a bone marrow transplant right away. He's like, well, hold on. He's like, that is a last resort thing at this point because we need to see if your bone marrow, we believe your bone marrow is still making a small amount or you would have been even worse than what you are right now. So there's a few things we can try. We can try to jumpstart your bone marrow with a few serums that we have. I had looked up the name of them because I couldn't remember. I just remember he said, we've got a rabbit serum and a horse serum. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, it's something we inject into a rabbit and then it becomes an antibody. They extract it and then they put it in you and it tries to recreate that for your own marrow. And I'm
Oh,
like,
wow.
okay. And he said, so that'll be the first process. He's like, you do need to get in the hospital like tomorrow. And I was like, okay. So he said, after that, he said, but today I want to get a sample of blood from your one full sister. Lori's my half. Tanya's my full sister. He said, we're going to start with her, see if she's a match. So in case you do have to have a bone marrow transplant, we know whether she's a match or not. And then that way we can get you on a donor list. So they did her test that day. I go back in the next day to be put in the hospital to start the rabbit serum. And found out that my sister Tanya was exact match for my marrow. So
That's crazy.
1 in 10,000 chance that your full sibling matches, and that's your best chance. And at the time, aplastic anemia was a 1 in 1.5 million people have this. And I looked it up yesterday. I think it's now like two or 1 in 2 million or something like that, or a little less than a million now or so. But it's, children get it too, and they don't really know what's going on. So that was, it was just one more thing that I knew that I had to do. Like, okay, let's do the next step. But that first day I was there before I went in the hospital, he sent me home with a book about bone marrow transplants and explains the whole thing. And I don't know if it's the same book you got, but I go home or I go to my aunt's and my grandma's.
Well,
And I
I'm not sure
remember,
it's the same book because it was 20 years later, but I mean,
yeah,
I've still got my book right here.
same information. Yeah. So it just basically explains the whole process. So I want to say not very far into the book, I remember laying on the couch at my aunt's house and I was flipping through and reading about bone marrow transplants. And this is March 98. And very quickly, I got to the portion that said, if you had to have bone marrow transplant, you go through chemo and you would not be able to have kids after that. And when I read that page, I was, there was nothing worse to me than that thought. Like, I love kids. I've always wanted kids, worked in daycare my whole time I was in high school. Like, that was my dream, was to have kids, period. Like, that's really all I wanted in life, was to have kids. So I took that book, and I want to say it was like page 3. I read about infertility. I took that book, and I remember I just chunked it across my aunt's living room, and I was like, I'm not reading the book. Like, I'm done with the book. I don't want the book. And so went to the hospital the next day, and he put me in the hospital. He comes in there to talk to me. And as we began to talk about the process, I told him, I said, listen, I started your book. He's like, it's not my book. It's a bone marrow book. I was like, okay. So I was like, and, I don't really need it like right now. Right. The bone marrow transplant. He's like, no, we got lots of things we can try. I was like, okay, well, from here on out, I'm just letting you know, if I don't need to know it today, you don't have to tell it to me. And he's like, okay. And he dealt with me the rest of the time. For almost 4 years, he dealt with me like that. And it was awesome. And so
Yeah.
I was like, okay, we'll just take day by day, and what happens, happens. So I go in the hospital. They put my port in. That was the first time I had the central line put in. Horrible. For some reason, that process was horrible for me. Like, I had complications. I'd always have pain the entire time I had it in there, no matter what. And I hated it. So the rabbit serum, they get 1 dose in me, and you get like 4 doses of that, I think. And when they started the second dose, I had 3 friends in the room with me. And I have a picture of them on my Facebook where they're in the hospital with me at that time. And it starts to go in the second bag. They started, and all of a sudden I couldn't breathe, and it felt like I was like, my chest was being crushed. And I start banging the machine. I'm like, I can't talk. Like, I can't breathe anything. I'm allergic to it, apparently. So they stop it immediately. They run, get the nurses, stop it. And they're like, okay, well, we can't do that one. So they, cleaned me out of all that. And we're like, all right, we're not trying that one. We'll try the horse serum. So they started that one. I took it. My body had no response to it. They immediately started me on cyclosporin and prednisone. And so I came out of the hospital on those 2 drugs. And by this time, I remember that day that I left the hospital. I had already let Thomas, Lexi's dad, know, everything that was going on. And he was there for me and was like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, I love you, and we're going to be together forever. And no matter what happens, I'm with you. And I was like, okay, So I get out of the hospital, and I still had my line in because I was going every day, and they were giving me some blood and stuff like that, and just did multiple tests. And I want to say about 2 weeks goes by, and I went in the hospital, and they did some more tests, and they were like, listen, we're going to keep you on the cyclosporin and the prednisone regimen because your counts are like kind of leveling out a little bit, and it's helping your bone marrow at this point. And I'm like, oh, awesome. Cool. So, me and Lexi's dad, like I said, knew this was the person for me and everything. And we were together one time, and about a week later, I start craving pickles, which I did not like pickles.
Yeah.
So all these things that you hear about people start craving, that was happening to me. And I still had my port in, like I'm going to the hospital every day. And this is, April, this is into April now. And a little over a month after my diagnosis. And it was not a planned thing. We did what we were supposed to. And I just knew 2 weeks after that date, I knew in my body, like I knew something was going on, and I knew what it was. And I told Thomas, and I said, I think I think I might be pregnant. And he was like, what? There's no way, you know? And I'm like, I'm just telling you, like, something's going on. Like, I'm going to call my doctor. So I call the oncologist and he's like, what? He's like, well, thanks for keeping me on my toes, but let's get you in here and do a test because I don't know. Because I told him
Yeah,
exactly.
because you've got all this physical stuff going on, and now you're pregnant.
Yeah. One, I mean, and we were together literally one time. And so I go to the hospital. I don't know if my daughters even know this part, but um, I go to the doctor the next day and they do the test, and sure enough, I'm pregnant. And of course, I didn't, I wasn't like, oh, yeah, it was, but it wasn't, you know, I'm like,
Yeah, I understand.
what am I doing? You know, like, what are we doing? Like, but
Yeah.
that was, I knew I didn't do this like intentionally, like, but I sure wasn't going to be upset. But I also was like, oh my gosh, what does this mean? So he's like, hey, you need to go to a high risk baby doctor and talk to them and see, you know, let them know everything's going on and see what he says. So it's like a week later, and I go to a doctor over by Baylor. And I remember going in there, me and Thomas go in there, and he's like, hey, sits down with us. He's like, yeah, you're definitely pregnant. And I'm like, I said, listen, like literally within 2 weeks, I could tell. And he's like, there's no way. Like you could tell. I was like, I'm telling you, I could tell. And, but he sets us down in his office and he's kind of like, hey, like you're this early in it. Like, I do not recommend you having this baby. He's like, he's like, I think you'll be okay. I mean, I think the baby would be okay. I'm not saying what you have doesn't necessarily like transfer to the baby. I'm not so much concerned about the baby, but I don't know that you'll live through it. Like, I don't think you'll live through the pregnancy and be able to sustain that and be pregnant with
Oh, wow.
everything going on. And I literally, like, I remember sitting at the desk looking at Dr. Gumby was his name. And I look over at Thomas and I looked at him and we looked at each other and I was like, no way. And I looked at the doctor. I said, listen, I 100% respect your idea on this and your thoughts and your warnings and all of those things. I was like, but listen, you don't know my story.
Yeah.
And I was like, I just said, you know what? You know, our faith does not stop at your doorway. And though we made a dangerous decision, it wasn't on purpose. It wasn't intentional in that way, but I don't think that God makes mistakes, and I will never take a baby's life. It will never happen. So just get that out of your mind and tell me what I can do from here. And he said,
Wow. So he basically was telling you to terminate it, and
for my
that
own
was just not
safety.
for your
Yeah.
own safety. Yeah. And so then, and then you're like, no.
But I
So
knew he
that was,
didn't have proof of that because they didn't even know. I mean, in my human way of trying to rationalize what I could do and what I could listen to and those things. But really I didn't do that until later. But in that moment, I was like, there's no way. Like, that's not even a thought. Like, it ain't gonna happen. Unless there's
yeah.
harm to the baby, unless you're telling me my child is gonna suffocate to death or it's gonna hurt the baby,
Right.
don't worry about me. You just tell me what I need to do to be healthy in this pregnancy and what I can do. And I'll get with my oncologist and he'll tell me what I need to do for me. And he was like, okay. He said, that is 100% up to you. And I will support y'all in that. And I will treat you just like I do everybody else and make sure that you are healthy and your baby's healthy and do what we're supposed to do. I said, okay. I was like, that's what we'll do. And so go back to my oncologist and he's like, yeah. He said, okay, well, I guess we're going to be having a baby during this process. And I was like,
So this
yes.
is what, this is still in 2002 or is it 2003 now?
No, this is 98. This is a month
Oh, this is 98.
after my
Oh, that's right. I
diagnosis.
jumped. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a month after my about a little over a month after my diagnosis. And so, you know, during my pregnancy, I did, other than being horribly sick with morning sickness, and just I couldn't eat anything. Like I lost like 15 pounds the first 3 months because I couldn't even look at food or I'd get sick. And
What about your blood though? What did your blood
well,
keep up, or did you
so
have to have transfusions?
no transfusions. I was because the cyclosporin, and I was able to keep taking the cyclosporin during that time.
So
Um,
it helped your blood produce?
yeah, I had they pulled me off the prednisone um, to see what that would do because they didn't want me to take that with the baby, but they said the cyclosporin shouldn't affect the baby. I don't know how. I don't know. I don't remember exactly how they worded it or how much I was on. I just know I had to keep taking cyclosporin because it smelled like a when you open that pill, it was these big, huge, gray oval pill or long submarine looking pills. I mean, they were that big. And
Yeah.
Thomas would have to open them an hour, excuse me, prior to me taking them because they smelled just like a skunk. I will never forget it. And they had to let them air out or else I would immediately throw up smelling it. And so, yeah, it was the whole every night. It was the process for the rest of my pregnancy. I had to do that every night. And sometimes I would get sick, but once I hit about 4 months pregnancy, like I had no more of the sickness. I did really well. All of my counts like shot up. So because of what your immune system does while you're pregnant, it can either boost your immune system or, would have possibly dragged me down, which was what the OBGYN was concerned about. But he was amazed. I mean, they were both the oncologist and the baby doctor were both just like, you're doing so great. And I did awesome through my pregnancy. Um, I was due January 10th of 99. And on December 28th, that morning, we had just drove back home from Christmas at my mom's in Canton, near Canton. And Thomas was getting ready to go out of town. And I had gone into the bathroom and I stood up and my water just went and broke. And it was December 28th and 1998 at the end of that year. And so he rushed me to the hospital and I got there and literally laid there all day having crazy contractions that didn't phase me forever. I mean, the doctors kept coming
Yeah.
in. They were like, are you sure you're not feeling that? And the machine was like going crazy. I remember I was sitting there playing Tetris on a Game Boy the whole day. And yeah. And so finally, probably around 3 o'clock, that's about when the pain started hitting. And I'm like, where is that epidural? They gave me an epidural and then I was quiet for a couple of hours. And then he came in to check me. And by the time he just walked out of the room, it started up like that. And he came in, he was like, let me go change and keep her just like that with her knees together. So he
Yeah.
comes back in. I have Lexi at 5:59 p.m. on December 28th. And it was
Wow.
amazing,
That's
greatest
awesome.
thing I can remember. Yes, my baby. I can remember them putting her on my chest and I couldn't quit. I was just like, oh, I couldn't quit crying. I was just like, oh my gosh, this is the
Well, it
greatest
was
thing.
something you dreamed about having, and in the middle of it all, it's like, and I think it's so interesting that knowing for after that the process, and I didn't know that, or if that's still the case or not, as far as that chemo and what it does, or
Yeah.
as far as not being able to have children after that. And
Well,
so
so what it explains is that it freezes your ovaries is what it does. And so, a
okay,
female's born with all the eggs she'll ever have. So if anything happens to those, that's it. Like you don't get more. Guys reproduce, women
ah,
do not.
ah,
So if your eggs are destroyed, that's it.
yeah. And for you
So
guys that are listening, I'll just do a picture up of Lacey. She's a little girl, so pretty.
yeah,
But
when I had her, the doctor, she was born with blonde hair that thick with white tips. And of course, my mom is blonde and blue eyed, and then Lexi's dad. So they're the ones in the room. But the doctor, he was just like, if I had not just delivered this kid, I think I have her in the wrong room. I'm like a little white baby. And so it was obviously best day of my life. And
yeah. Well, and again, it's just a cool moment to know that knowing now, looking back, that you're headed to the stem cell transplant. That's going to happen. At
yeah,
that time, you don't know that.
Yep.
And even with all the whatevers, um,
I mean, I
just knowing
definitely wanted
God's
my own
plan is
child,
bigger than us. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
but I've
And you
always
got
been
to,
about adoption as well. But I mean, having my own child, like I know, I mean, I pain for people who don't get to experience that, and I do understand the goodness of just being grateful to have any child at all, um,
yeah. Because
whether
you really,
biological.
looking back at it, you had a small window
Yes,
before the stem cell transplant. Yeah.
very. And like I said, I
Yeah.
mean, I know, like we didn't go, oh, well, I better get pregnant before, no way. I mean,
No.
that would have been too scary to even think about. That was not my thought. I was, with the person I was going to be with the rest of my life at the time, I thought. And, I
It was
definitely
a
was
moment.
facing the thoughts of
Yeah.
how long I had left, those
Yeah.
types of things. And so that was not on my mind at all. But
Right.
thank goodness God does what he does and uses what we do
Yeah.
to his
Right.
glory, because
Yeah.
we're idiots at times, and so he makes it look pretty, like my
I'm
daughter.
an idiot. I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot often. So
Say
you may think sometimes, but I'm
no,
often
I
an
am.
idiot.
So,
No,
but
I doubt it.
so it was, all that in it. Literally my life is just a testimony inside another testimony inside another testimony inside another. Like it is just unreal. And
Yeah.
I led up to basically had her, and then between, so nothing major happened the rest of the time in between that and my transplant, but it was about
Did you
once.
stay on the medications and
So yeah,
it just
so as
finally
soon
quit
as
working?
yeah, as soon as I had Lexi, they put me back on the prednisone because my body immediately, my immune system wasn't functioning as high because I wasn't pregnant anymore. So within, I would say probably within 2 months, they put me back on the prednisone as well. And it was once a year. So 99, 2000, and 2001, I went back in the hospital usually once a year for them to kind of, well, I was having to get transfusions um, multiple times during that time, just because they'd start trying to mess with my dosage and numbers. And I could go
Yeah.
in and tell them exactly when they say my counts, they'd print out the sheet. I'll never forget those sheets. I heard you talking about it on one of your other podcasts, talking to somebody, and how you look at the numbers, and you're like, oh, you're like kind of like, and
I put
yeah,
my thumb up over it, and I'm like, eat away.
and I have a
Now they don't. Now you have to dig deeper. They got new reports and stuff like that. So
Oh,
anyway,
wow. Yeah, they'd print it out. So I literally have a box in here somewhere in my office with all of my count sheets. Like, because they print it off and
really,
it still had the little tabs you pull on the sides of the paper they printed out. And I would carry those with me every time. And I could look at it while I was sitting there waiting on him to come in the room. And I'd look at my counts and I'd be like, okay, so you're going to keep my cyclosporin the same, and you're probably going to drop my prednisone or up my and he would look at it and he'd go, I really need to encourage you to become a doctor. Like, yeah, no, I just live in your office. I'm not actually a doctor. I don't get paid
yeah,
like you. And of course, his assistant would be in there, the one that does everything. And she's like, well, it's me that does all the work. I was like, I know. Her name was Laura. She was amazing. But so it was through the years, and he would put me in the hospital and try another one of those serums again and see if it did anything. Nothing was working. So 2001, mid-year, I would say summertime of 2001, he kind of started saying, okay, so towards the end of this year, I really want to start, bringing you down off of those drugs, because if you're on prednisone any longer, like much longer, your bones are going to be rubber by the time you're 50 years old. I'm like, yeah, they don't sound good either. So let's see what happens. So during this time, Tanya had her first child, Bailey, Just she's 11 months younger than Lexi. So she had Bailey shortly after I had Lexi during that time. And then September of 2001, right when 9/11 happened,
Yeah.
is whenever he finally got me tapered off of the drugs. And from September, I wrote it down, September of 2001 to January from October to January of 2002, I had 70 pints of blood transfused. I was going every
How
week.
many?
70. I was going every week and getting 2 pints of blood because I wasn't making it anymore. Once he got me off the meds in September, from October to January, I had 70 pints transfused because I just wasn't making it.
Wow, that's
And to date,
crazy.
yeah, and to date, I had a total of 90 units at that point. During that, the other years, I would go in and he'd have to give me, because he'd start messing with the medicine, and you could tell. And then finally in September, he knew that we had to get me off these drugs. And as soon as he started that process, I was not making the blood. Like you could tell in my counts every single time. And so
So
it was
your
around,
bone marrow, so your stem cells weren't working.
no.
All
So
right, when
you can't, as somebody with aplastic anemia, cannot receive their own stem cells at all. Like, period. They're no good.
yeah, because they won't reboot.
Right. So you have to have the
So
allergen.
like, and just knowing what I know about stem cells, just from the whole process of the whole transplant and everything like that, it's like, I mean, that's crazy. So they're not, because they're the lifeblood of our bodies, and so
Yeah.
yours weren't working at all, or they weren't.
Right.
Was the marrow not producing stem cells, or were the stem cells just not producing?
So
Or did I ask that right? I don't know if I asked that right.
basically your bone marrow stops making those early red blood cells. So they're called something else. What are they called before they become red blood cells? I thought I wrote that down, but basically I just quit making the red blood cell part of my
I got you. Okay.
marrow.
Okay.
So
Crazy.
so you would see like I never had to have platelets transfused or anything like that, because it goes in conjunction with, well, it's the red count that's like messing up. And so your white count, with leukemia, you overproduce your white count and it attacks your own system, is what leukemia
Right.
is. And so basically they say that aplastic anemia is the exact opposite of leukemia, but aplastic anemia is non-cancerous because it's flat out the red blood cells. You just don't make them anymore. So it's not attacking anything. You're just not making it. So if you can get
so
it,
your bone marrow is not making anything. I mean, it's
right.
like, it's just it's not working. So your stem cells aren't working.
Yeah. So my immune system was like done. So basically,
That's crazy.
Huh?
I said, that's crazy.
Yeah. So we knew at that point, I mean, that was bad. Like that was a lot. And so right around, I want to say around November of 01 is when he started saying, hey, like you're tapering real fast. He said, I want to try you. I want to try one more thing. And so for the month of December of 2001, he said, we are going to pump you full of testosterone, like extreme high doses, because it's been known to help your marrow produce that, basically. And that's why I think when you get men get testosterone, they have to go and donate plasma or plasma. Yeah, because it's overproducing. Yeah, that's what it is. It's overproducing. So that's what they were going to try and do. So I have some pictures from that Christmas. By the Christmas that came around and Lexi turned 3, that I made my mom throw away. Anybody that had pictures from that, I gained literally like 35, 38 pounds in a month, because they were just pumping me full of that testosterone, and it was horrible. I was like, "What is this?" And I was like, "What in the world?"
Yeah, you didn't send me any of those pictures.
No, there's no, they're non-existent. So probably some of Lexi's side of the family has some because I remember her Aunt Christy and Kathy having some pictures from a Christmas at their house that year, and I was like, "You better get rid of those pictures." So I look like a football player, and but it's funny
Well,
because
yeah,
like
because you're getting tons of testosterone.
yeah, and it made it even worse because so in the it was funny. My doctor, I told you, he was like super laid back, and he was just awesome. My mom, everybody loved him, and he was very dry sense of humor, which it went well with how I joked about my own death. And
Yeah.
he's like, oh my goodness, this girl. And but I used to always when I started taking that cyclosporin. Did you have to take that at all?
Mm-mm.
Okay,
Mm-mm.
so it is this
Wait.
nasty. It's a nasty pill. The one I said tastes smells like a skunk.
Yeah, no, I didn't take that.
But it, when you have you ever seen like, a kidney or liver patient and they get that thin coat of
Mm-hmm.
hair all over their body?
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
cyclosporin is what does that because they have to take that as well. So I used to joke with Lexi's dad and about how hairy I was because I'm half Mexican and like I mean I had my hair was 10 times as thick of what I have now. And so I would go to the doctor and I would told him once I started on that cyclosporin, I was like, listen, I don't know what is going on here, but I don't need any extra hair growth. I was like, this stuff, I literally pluck my eyebrows in the morning, and by the night, I'm plucking them again. That's how fast my hair. He's like, he would always get. He's like, Tennille, you're the only person that comes into an oncology building complaining about hair growth. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
you're right. You're
That's
right.
true. That's
I'll
true.
stop saying it. So,
Yeah.
just those experiences you remember just because you're going through that stuff, and then when he started talking to me about the transplant, he said, we're down to the end, and we need to get your family in here, and we need to have a discussion about the bone marrow transplant. I was like, okay, so we go to the hospital, they talk about it. He said, listen, it's imminent. We have to do it. Like she's not making blood anymore, and if she don't have the transplant, she'll be dead in 6 months. Like she'll be gone. And so we need to get her in here to do this quick. I was like, okay. So tell my sister, and we go in for all the preliminary test. And I don't know if you had to do it. Did they do that test where you got to get in that booth thing and test your breathing and make
Yeah.
sure your
Yeah.
lung capacity is good and all
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
I'll
I
never
did all
forget
that.
that. And then they had Tanya go do whatever she had to do as the donor, and she had to do, they just did blood work on her, and then just did a basic, I think, health checkup on her.
Right.
So I get done with my test. I go out into the waiting room. This is early January, and I come out there to talk to my sister, and it's just us there. And she says she looks awful, and me and my sister are different in a lot of ways, and one being she is very much the researcher, and I know probably the day I was diagnosed, she looked it up and I was dead already. Not towards her. I'm just saying that she can't help that. Like she's going to look into that stuff, and every
Right.
family, is going to look up that stuff. So
Yeah. That's why Dolly is too. Yeah.
and then I go out there, and she looks worried and like she's about to cry the whole time. And I'm just like, are you okay? Like, what's going on? And she tells me, she's like, Tennille, and she knows her body really well. She knew the day she was pregnant with Bailey. She knew exactly when she was going to get pregnant. Like she knew her body like that. And she said, Tennille, I'm late. And I'm like, okay. And I was like, how late? And she's like, well, like 2 weeks. I said, well, and then she starts like physically shaking and like she gets real upset, and she's like shaking. She's like, I know, but what are we going to do if I am like, I won't be able to do this. And I'm like, hold on. Like we're in the oncology, waiting room. And I'm like, hey, okay, well, we'll talk to him and see what the deal is, if that's the case. And so rest of family comes back in. We go into the room with the doctor, and she tells him, and he was like, let me get let me get an anesthesiologist in here, you know, and it depends on how far along you are. So he gets all that info, come to figure out she's no more than a month pregnant, if she is pregnant. And they do a test, and she is. So she finds out she's pregnant with Avery. And the we I think we go home that day, and I remember going to Tanya and Michael's. They are in Forney at the time, lived in Forney, and I remember sitting in Bailey's baby room, and you know, Tanya just telling me, "Hey, like, I don't know what to do because there's no way they're going to be able to do it." I was like, "Well, we don't know that. We're going to talk to the anesthesiologist tomorrow and find out that part of it." And Dr. Gura said that he thinks as long as the anesthesiologist says it's okay, because it's actually a non-surgical procedure, but they put you to sleep for it because it's painful, and they're doing a hole in each hip to extract 50 vials of the marrow is what it is. It's 50. I think it was 50 in each side of her hip, but you're out. Obviously you can't lay there that long hurting. Like, so that's why they put you under, but it's non-surgical. So she tells me, I remember sitting in the floor of Bailey's room, and she was like, "Tennille, no matter what, like, me and Michael already talked about it, and we'll do whatever we have to do for you to have this transplant." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, you'll do whatever you have to do?" And she was like, "You know, if we have to, you know, terminate this or what?" I was like, "Absolutely not. It's not going to happen. Like, no way." And I told her right then, I was like, "God does not take a life to save a life. That is not happening." I was like, He knows exactly what is happening. He knew you were my match. He knew that he already knows these things, and he can take these things. If that means that this is it for me, then this is it for me. But I will not live knowing that you killed your baby to let me live.
Yeah.
There's no way. Like, never would I let that happen. I was like, besides that, we don't even know. Like, let's go tomorrow. And so it's kind of how it got left. And then the next day we go in, and, you know, the anesthesiologist came out, and he was like, "Hey, you know, a baby," he basically explained it and said, you know, a female's body when you're pregnant has a natural chance of an abortion because it's a self, you know, automatic abortion because it's a foreign object in your body. Everybody has that capability. He said it only being under anesthesia only increases that portion by 1%. He
So it
said,
increased the
so
chance of a miscarriage, basically.
yeah, of a miscarriage, by 1%. He's like, it, and that is, we put people under for emergency surgeries all the time pregnant, all the way into their second and third trimester. You are in your first trimester. There is almost zero change in anything other than just the fact that you'll go under anesthetic. I mean, and he was real good about explaining it. And he said, absolutely. And my doctor was in there. He was like, "You're doing this. Your sister will be dead if you don't." And I guess he just felt the need to say that. We were all like, we know. So, you know, we pretty much made that determination at that time. And he said, "So you'll go in the hospital." I think, let's see. There was something about during that time. I can't remember what it was I was thinking, but so that was January of 2002, and I go in the hospital. Before I went in the hospital, he said, "Hey, here's the things you're going to face. I know that you know, only want to know what you have to know." He's like, "But you really need to read the portions of that book about graft versus host disease. And that's basically the things that can happen to your body after the transplant, because your body will try to reject it to a certain point. And as long as it's successful, even if it's successful, your body still goes through a rejection process. We don't know to what extent, but if you read over what that is, it'll tell you the symptoms that, or, you know, the things that could happen." And he said, "Otherwise, make sure I had real long hair. It was like way down here." And he's like, "Cut your hair really short." He's like, "You'll go through 6 days of," he just said 6 days of hardcore chemo is all he said. And it's like you go in the hospital and it's going to be, day positive day 6, 5, 4, 3, 2,
Yeah.
1, whatever.
Yeah.
And then you'll be day 0 will be when you receive the bone marrow transplant. She'll come in the hospital, we'll extract it, we'll bring it down, you'll receive her marrow, and then from there it's or +1, +2, whatever it is.
So they did that. So they did that on the same day. So they took hers on the same day, and gave them to you on the same day.
I believe so. If
Yeah.
I'm
Well, it's been
remembering
22 years ago.
correctly,
Yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah.
That's how I've always remembered it. Like I said, there's a few things that I remember sometimes, and then I'll talk about it with somebody that was there, and they're like, "Oh, I think it was this." I'm like, "Oh, well," but I'm pretty sure it was the same day. I
Yeah.
think they brought her in that morning, I believe, and did that part. And so I already knew, that she was out of into recovery and doing good and all of those things. Um, and during that time that I was in the hospital, I go in on the 19th, and they cut my hair real short. He said, when you go in, it'll take about 2 weeks for you to start losing your hair. And when he said that to me, he goes, so typically, I mean, it was so hilarious. And I knew as soon as he started talking about the hair loss that he was already like about to say something sarcastic or funny to me. And he goes, typically, most of the women and some of the men have a hard time with this part. He said, am I right in assuming that you're not going to have an issue with the hair loss? And I was like, no. He said, well, he goes, and the reason I'm asking that is because 1, it's going to happen. 2, we've got support groups that you can go to while you're in here. And, you go in there and y'all talk about your experience with it. I said, no, thank you. I was like, I promise you, like for me, I can understand 100% why it affects anybody else. For me, like, just Lexi was going to be there with me every day. My mom was able to come up there with her and be there and stay the night and everything. And that it did not cross my mind I was not one bit concerned about my hair. Like it never affected me that way. And I praise God for that, because my mind was elsewhere. Not that anybody else's isn't elsewhere. I just know that it just was not a struggle for me.
Yeah.
In that part
And I
of
think
it.
too, like you kind of come to the place. So, I mean, after you get the stem cell transplant and and I think the thing that I'm realizing about your condition is that even then, I mean, at this point, whenever, when they wiped out your immune system, your immune system wasn't working anyway.
Yeah.
And so, or your, not so much your immune system, but they weren't producing what you
Right.
needed anyway. You're having to get that from other things anyway. And so this was kind of like the home run shot, it's like, we got to,
There
I
was
mean,
no other
this,
choice.
yeah, there wasn't any other choice. Yeah. It was, and I think what's crazy is that this is um, it's a dangerous, it's a risky moment in your life, where all this is coming together. And then you've got, Tanya, and she's willing to do whatever needs to be done, to make sure that you have what you need.
Mm-hmm.
And, and you're at that point, and then you get the stem cell. And like for me, it was an auto, so I was getting my own back. So I didn't have to do the rejection drugs, and I didn't have to do those kind of things, which we talked about that, in the
Right.
past. But, you have all those kind of things, but even though she was 100% match, but there's still that chance
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
that could happen, and so, and so there you are. It's just, I got this, if you guys that are listening, I'm pulling some pictures up of Tennille when she had lost her hair.
So that picture on the top, on the left, with where it's like that shaved, because what's funny about it is, it every day in the hospital after about a week of chemo, and my mom's in there with Lexi every day, and everybody's visiting me like crazy, and every day I would do like this, and I would grab a little portion of my hair and I'd pull. And my mom would
Yeah.
get so mad at me. She was like, quit doing that. I was like, well, I'm just seeing if it's gonna come out yet. And I'd cut it to about here. And I remember the day before this picture, I had gone into like the little common area, and I was in there and I plucked my eyebrows, and I was just making sure they were, well, I got to plucking happy and made them super thin. And then that same day, I got in the shower and I was in the shower and I was washing my hair. And like I noticed some hairs on my hand and I went like this and I just grabbed a little section and it just went whoop, the whole look. So there's, if you look real close at that picture, there's like a literal bald spot on the top. That's where I pulled
Yeah.
my hair out. And I came out of the shower and I had it in my hand and I showed my mom. I was like, Mom, look. I was like, it's happening. And I do like that. And of course she's like, Tennille. And and she starts crying and she's like, I can't believe you're joking about it. I was like, well, look, what am I going to do? And
Yeah.
so she, they'd already told me, hey, when that happens, let us know. We'll come in. And the nurses, all of them were like, hey, once that happens, like we'll have Lexi in here and whoever else you want in here and we'll shave it in front of her. That way she didn't walk in and you're bald. I was like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
that's a good idea. So that's what they did. They came in and
Well, I think it's crazy too that one of the things I remembered when we talked that November before I had my stem cell transplant, you telling me about Lexi being in there with you and climbing all over you, and everything. Obviously, if she had been sick or something like that, they would have limited her exposure to you,
yeah,
I'm sure. But at the same time, it was like, and this is what I was saying a while ago, it's like you just start moving forward, and if you allow yourself. And when I say things like this, everybody responds differently. Everybody's built differently. Everybody, no matter what the case may be, but mentally is where the battle is won on so many levels, and you just start moving forward and
yeah,
you just start living as though, okay, I'm going to live today and then tomorrow's coming. I'm planning to live tomorrow, and I think that just your attitude makes such a big difference because it is true that, it's not what happens to you, but it's how you respond to what happens to you. It's how you approach it. And there are things that people can't help, I mean, things that just, you can have the best mental attitude, but physically you can just be beat down so
yep,
hard,
yeah,
where you just have a hard time getting back up on your feet, and even in the midst of that, you can have a great attitude and everything, but I think, just listening to your story and realizing that this was a huge moment because they wiped out everything and you get Tanya's stem cells and then you just kind of just start moving forward. I mean, it's like, I'm going to be, you start whatever. I mean, and you were 25 years
yep,
old at the time,
mhm, yep,
and, I mean, I was 30 years older. Well, 30, not quite 30, but I was 53. I was 54 when I got the stem cell transplant,
yeah,
But I remember you telling me the story of being in the hospital and these pictures that we're looking at. And just side note, that bottom left hand picture looks just like Courtney, but to me, but Courtney is her niece. But I just remember how powerful it was to have, just you, re, you know, going through how you responded because you were at the same place. I don't know if it was the
mhm.
same floor or I don't know if it was all the same
No, that
space at
wouldn't
the
have been
side.
built
It
yet.
was,
That
yeah.
that part of the
Oh
building.
yes, yeah. And so, but it made a big difference, in my life to know that 22 years ago that you came through it and you had all those things happen and it was just it gave me hope, in such a big way. And I believe that's what our stories are all about. And this disease is crazy.
Yeah.
And the fact that, and however many people, I hope that other people, maybe that, connecting with people that have aplastic anemia, I don't know how difficult that is. I'm sure, it may be like when you get a different car, you start seeing it everywhere. You may have run into a lot, but have you met a lot of people that have this condition or,
No.
um,
So, at the time, when you kind of Googled it and looked up anybody or anything about it, Mia at the time when I was diagnosed, I had looked some stuff up, and Mia Hamm's brother, I was a big Mia Hamm fan, of course, playing soccer, and her younger brother had actually died from aplastic anemia. He did not have, I think he did not have a match, and there was like nobody really knew anything
wow.
about it, no research, no anything like that. So it was very new in
That's what I'm
things.
saying. This was crazy. This is I mean, this is like you said, this is deadly because if you can't get that match, then your body's not working. It's not creating what you need.
Right. And so what, it depends, I guess. So the thing that changes it with aplastic anemia and where you're at in it is how severe it is. So people can actually have aplastic anemia and respond to cyclosporin and a couple of other,
Yeah.
there's a couple of what are they called? Like the antibodies that they tried to give me. They have worked
Yeah.
for other people when their bone marrow is still producing some. But basically they were like, yours is not producing it. So there's no way to, like, your bone marrow is not jump starting. Like it's not creating that effect. And so that's
But at
why
the same
moved.
and honestly, like thinking back, I mean, and of course, who am I? I'm not, but I'm just knowing how this works now myself, as far as what your red blood cells, your white blood cells, your
Mhm,
platelets, they're all produced from their stem cells, which come from your bone marrow,
mhm,
and if your antibodies, if your plasma cells aren't creating antibodies, but I mean, it makes sense that looking back over the course of your life that you had that could have been possibly part of the journey that because you might go through systems or times or whatever. I have no idea, but it makes sense. But this is a crazy, crazy disease, and I think it reaffirms the fact of just faith and and just how divine that Tanya was 100% match. How divine it was for you to have Lexi in that small window of time,
mhm.
and and just the things that took place. And like I told you, thinking back and remembering, everybody is in their own world. Even tonight, I mean, we're making this, and who knows who's watching, and who knows who will watch.
Right.
But somebody that watches this, to the end with us, and as we go through this whole process, or listens to it, I think hearing this part of it is important. To hear this part of your story. Just the journey of just going through childhood and teenage years and young adulthood and having to deal with all this stuff, and I, it's like when you said your doctor was like, you're not gonna, you losing your hair is not gonna be a big deal to you because you're like, no, I just, because I've already been through so much, right? It's like,
Mhm.
I mean, what's that? I mean, I don't really care. I just want to,
Yeah,
I want to be
I
well.
saw my baby standing there. I'm like, if she can keep her hair, like, great. And
Yeah.
that's part of it too, and it, it's definitely, less emotional now to talk about it, depending on where I'm at in my head. But, before I went in the hospital, the parts
No, I
of it
can't.
that
Yeah, I would love for you to talk about that.
it was like, once I knew, I was going in, and that I knew this was it. I mean, this was the last thing that I had to face. That if I didn't question whatsoever. God was with me and knew what was going to happen. I did not question that. There were parts of my journey after being diagnosed that I had not said that. At the time, I told you, me and Lexi's dad were both really already seeking God when we met each other. And then when we got together, and just to see somebody as hungry for it as I was at the time, that was awesome to see. And then his family was that way. His mom and his sisters, loved them, and I was around them quite a bit. And shortly after I was diagnosed, and I know you begin probably everybody, when you're facing your mortality, you definitely are looking deeper into things, and I already was
Yeah.
doing that. But
Yeah.
I I didn't take things for granted, that I knew God spoke through people, through moments. I could be at a gas station and somebody say something to me and it meant something to me. And it was like, okay, what is
Right.
that supposed to mean? Well, at the time, I know it's, regardless of who he used at the time, I know he used Kenneth Copeland Ministries and Creflo Dollar at this time. I can't speak for the rest of their journey and their walk and who they are, but I went to the first Christian conference I'd ever been to in my entire life. About I was maybe 2 months pregnant with Lexi, and his mom said, "Hey, y'all want to go with me?" And the girls, he's got two younger sisters, Thomas does, to a big thing they're having in Fort Worth at the convention center with Kenneth Copeland, and Jesse Duplantis was there. She loved Jesse Duplantis, and we'd watch him and laugh and crack up and stuff like that. And then also Creflo Dollar. And at the time, I really loved some of his messages, and his wife Taffy I would hear her talk too, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll go, whatever, like I want to be around as many believers as I can. Well, Fort Worth Convention Center is huge. There were 20,000 people there, and we were way up high on the balcony, and we're there. Awesome messages that night. So we're there, maybe 3 hours, and at the end of it, they're they did kind of altar call and say, you want to come up here? And there were multiple famous, preachers up there, and people are just flooding up there, to get prayed over and everything else. And then they send everybody back, and they're talking a little more. And then Creflo gets up there and kind of interrupts whatever's being said. And he says, he goes, me and my wife both really feel like we have a calling of praying for healing when we feel that God is really speaking to us about a specific thing. And right now, I just have to say that I'm being called at this moment to call everyone down that has recently, this 2 months, 2.5, 3 months after my diagnosis. And he says that has been diagnosed with a blood disorder.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
literally, like, I look at Sandy, his mom, and his sisters, and Thomas, and I mean, it was like literally like balls of water were just like popping out of everybody's eyes, and I'm almost frozen in the moment. And I've shared that with a few people, because very few people, because it's like, unless you really know me and know I'm not going to just like dramatize something, like that, it's hard, it's just so unbelievable, because we don't live in a world where we believe that stuff happens, and that God still works that way through people. And I was like, oh my gosh. He said, I want, if that is you, I need you to come down here now. And I just, I bowed my head, because I'm not like trying to, there's just certain responses that people have. And I'm just like, I don't, I feel like this, but I don't know. Like, I'm sitting there still talking to myself and going, is this really what he just said? And they all just are like touching me and crying. And I'm like, up there, we're way up there. I'm a mile up the thing too. And I'm like, they'll be done by the time I even make it up there. And I look down, and I just start praying, and in my hands, and I'm just like, in my head, I'm thinking, God, I believe in you, and I believe in healing, and that I know that you know what's going on. What do I do right now? Because I didn't want it to be anything but God, and that's it. And not a person, not anything to do with anybody up there. And by the time I even open my eyes, the line is like so long. And I'm just like, man. And then I'm like, look at all these people, suffering. Like, look at all these people with this stuff going on. And I was like, you know what? I've got to go. Like, I've got to go. And as I'm walking down there, of course, I can see there's 25 people up on the stage, just walking across and like putting hands on people and praying. And there are people falling out, and, and I'm just like, personally, I'm like, no, that, like,
I'm not going to give you a courtesy ball.
Like, if
Yeah.
that's what really would happen to you, great. But that, I don't know that I have that with God. Like, if that's what that is, I don't know. But I'm not.
Right.
So and then of course I'm thinking I don't want to be cynical. I don't want to. What if that really is what God wants me to wants me to feel?
Right.
What if that's really how somebody responds to it? I don't feel like that's me. And so as I'm getting closer to the stage, I'm thinking that, and I'm going. I was praying, and I was like, Lord, please, please, please let it be Creflo that prays with me, because there were multiple people praying over people.
Yeah.
And he was way on the other end of the stage. And I'm like, the whole time I'm like, there's no way he's going to get to me. Like, there, I want it to be him. I wanted it to be him. I just felt like it had to be him. And I get up on that stage. When I get to the stage, there's like three people next to me, and he breaks the line and literally comes straight to me and puts his hands on me and just grabbed my arm and said, "What is your name?" And then held my hand
That's
and grabbed
crazy.
my arm and just sat there and prayed with me. And I was just like, I mean, it was just, I mean, I can't even, like I said, I've maybe told that part of my testimony 3 times ever. And so there's going back to it. I'm like, I don't know if people would even believe that if they don't know me, but it's just
Well, it
like,
doesn't. Here's the thing: it doesn't matter.
no,
It
I
doesn't
know,
matter if
I
they
know.
believe. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? No, I'm
Mhm.
not saying that to be. My thing is, it doesn't matter, and I know how you feel, because it's like you say something, I'll do the same thing. But I'm just saying this for your benefit too, to encourage you, because in that moment, I mean, who are we to define how, God? I mean, and here's the thing: is that people can take statements like that, but I'm just so encouraged by that, because here you are at this situation. You've gone, you're in this season of your life where you're searching and you're having to go through what you're facing, and you're not sure what's going on, and you're having to deal with all this, and and life and death kind of thing. Like you said a while ago, you're having to face your own mortality, and you're at this place, and you have a blood disorder, and then, excuse me, they are like talking about a blood disorder, and then there's one of the guys down there that, that has helped you and been an encouragement to you, that you respect. And then, and all that stuff is designed, for whatever reason, and how God works. And people can look them up and think what they want to about all that kind of stuff. But the reality of it was in what year was this now we're in? We're in,
98.
or we,
98.
yeah, I mean, you're in 98, and, um,
I
and
mean,
God used that
I knew
moment.
he used him. I
God
knew he
used that
used
moment in your, God used that moment in your life. And I think people listening, people watching, um, you didn't, you went there just because you felt like you're supposed to be there, and this is a whole nother discussion, and that we need to have more of these discussions, I believe. But, um, it's, as you look, whether it's stories from the Bible or testimonies of other people, whatever the case may be, that there were moments in time throughout history where people needed and to be encouraged, needed a
him.
moment, needed something, and a divine plan led you to that place in Fort Worth with your mother-in-law. um it's your mother-in-law, right? Is that right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And 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 you received something that gave you hope, and your prayer that you needed at that moment. And it had nothing to do with anything other than the fact that, you know, God just wanted to give that to you, through a method that would encourage you and lift you up. Your faith wasn't in no dollar. Your faith was in God, but that increased your faith because you
Yeah.
saw that happen, and you had a blood disorder and you saw that moment. I've had that same thing happen to me. I've been in a church and service where this guy didn't know me from Adam, and and something like that happened. Now, when you start identifying, and I'll say this last thing, and I'll shut up. You
Oh, no,
hit a
you're good.
hot button. You hit a hot button in my life. So it's like, but it's whenever you start searching for that experience, and that experience is what you build your faith on, then yeah, that's not sustainable. But when your faith is founded on a relationship with God, and for us through Jesus, then you have these moments that increase our faith,
Mhm.
and so yeah, I'm so glad you shared that. So glad you shared it because people need to hear that.
Well, and I
And
know
what's
it
sad about
changed.
anybody that's listening to this or watching this, and they want to judge the names of the people, you know what? That's irrelevant. They're missing the whole point. The point is, this is your story. This is your testimony, and people can find those same moments and can tell, and they're going to happen for them too. Just divine moments where God intervenes and gives us hope through a way that we never dreamed He would. You know,
Mhm.
and anyway, I think it's beautiful. I love it. So thank you for
But
sharing
it
it. I
was,
think it's great.
and it was because like I I know, Thomas's sisters are quite a bit younger than him, and um they were teenagers at the time, and so the look on their little teenage faces. I mean, we were all in
No, y'all
disbelief.
looked at each other like, "What the heck?"
And to see these two girls, hear that, and they loved me and love me to this day. And they were just, I knew it changed them. I knew that it was an experience that whether they even remember it exactly like that, I'm sure they probably do. There's no way that cannot reveal God to you when you
Yeah,
are there for that reason. When you are there and you're
yeah,
seeking God and you're asking Him for these things, and then He gives them to you. I mean, you
yeah,
have to know it's Him.
yeah,
So, and then it was
yeah.
maybe 2 months. So, that definitely planted my foot harder, even harder into my knowing that He's with me, and knowing that He's going to take care of whatever happens. Because not until it was about 2 months later, I was doing really well at getting in the Bible every night and just reading over scriptures, praying them over. And it was a big deal at the time because I was very new in my own walk, and really seeking God. And I knew, I heard multiple times from people that I admired and knew were strong believers, and you could just tell how they lived their life. And something they always said was to speak His word back to Him, out loud. Speak His word back to Him out loud, because He pleasures at hearing His own word, because He makes it happen. Like He puts it there for you,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you're telling Him, "Hey, you said this is what you're going to do." So
right.
I remember laying on the bed. It was about a month after that, and I was reading, and of course, I had always like always been good about reading scripturally about my faith. And Hebrews 11:1 was like definitely a staple in my life, and believing in what I
Yeah,
could not see. And that was very much in my head, and I was just like, oh yeah, that's definitely it. But one night I was sitting there reading, and of course I had always read Proverbs 3:5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. Think about Him in all your ways, and He will guide you and make your path straight. So I'd always read that. But that night I just kept reading. And I was probably one of those times where I was like, read a proverb and a psalm every day. And, it was one of those
yeah,
Bible schedules that you stick to. Well, that was my
right.
proverb. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to read all of Proverb 3, and then I'm going to whatever. And so I kept on, and it says in 7, don't consider yourself to be wise, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. And then the very next thing, which never in my life did I notice that the Bible spoke of marrow. And in verse 8, it says, this will be the healing for your body and strengthening for your bones. It shall be health to thy flesh and marrow to thy bones. When I read that verse, it was like, I can't tell you what washed over me, but in that, I mean, I felt like I was floating at that moment, and God just telling me, you are not going to die from this. I called my mom the
Yeah,
next day and said, Mom, God affirmed to me that I was not going to die from this. And she said, okay. And I said, well, I got to tell you what I read last night. And she knew that I didn't even get done with the first sentence of it. And she knew it. I mean, my mom knows so much scripture.
Right.
And when I saw that, that came over me, I got on the ground next to the bed on my knees. And I just said, I mean, I probably 30 minutes, I read that over and over and out to him and demanded that be that revelation in my life. And I was like, God, you said it is health to my flesh and it is marrow to my bones. I don't have marrow
Yeah.
right. I need you to give that to me. And you're telling me right now that you provide that. And I'm believing in you. And I know from this day forward that my death will not come from this, however that looks. But I do not believe that it's going to be from aplastic anemia. And
Yeah.
so, I go those next years and I'm like, I go through everything I went through, had my daughter and, the ups and downs with the counts. And I'd go in the hospital and have transfusions, little complications here and there, some weird random autoimmune stuff happening during that time too, but nothing major. And then when they told me, this is it, we don't have this now, it's 6 months and you're gone. And I still stood on it. And I said, okay, I got on my knees the night before I went in the hospital. And I was like, God, I know what you revealed to me. And I read that scripture again. I said, I know what you told me. But I also know that there are many things that I don't know. And there are many things that you do in life that don't make sense to us. And you're faithful and you're true to your own word. So I know that if it's within your will, that there's a greater purpose in me not being here and that I don't get to raise my own child,
Yeah.
that I'm still believing in you, that you're doing something with this, but I believe you and I believe what you're telling me. And so I'm going to go in the hospital and I'm going to live on that word. But I promise you, I'm ready to meet you if that's what you're calling me to do. And I was 100% clear in that. And I did not fear it. I didn't fear it. I didn't want that. I didn't want to not see my baby grow up. And so
Right.
I was just like, okay, but if that is your will, because I do believe in your will. So, but I also am here for whatever you bring me. So when I went in, they tell me, listen, it'll take about, you'll have chemo 6 days and then we'll come in and do the transplant. And then from there, it's +1, +2, +3. You'll be in here 30 days. About 30 days is typically how long you're in here. And he said, and they were like, the nurses would come in and they were like, listen, you're going to start doing real good after the transplant. Everything goes according to plan. And about day 9, somewhere between day 9 and 11, positive day, you're going to like taper off and you're going to
Right.
you're going to like go back down
All
and be like,
zeros.
you'll probably be like sick and not necessarily my counts, but they said just physically from
Okay.
chemo, from the transplant. That's usually when graft versus host starts kicking in. And that's basically what they're worried about. So in the graft versus host stuff, it said, so I had shingles in 1994, my senior year when all that was going on. And that was one of my traumas that I had. I mean, I had it so bad, it started here, didn't know what it was. I thought I had like bites or something. And then my flesh literally opened up. It was like, it's open nerve endings is what it is. And it wrapped
Yeah.
all the way
Right.
around here. It was one of the top worst things I've ever had in my life. And, and so graft versus host, because it knocks your immune system so out of whack. That was one of the things that could happen. You could get them all over your body, not just there. And I was just like, that was the worst thing I could think of happening. So they were like, not saying that's going to happen, but you may hit a, downward spiral for a few days. So from the time I got in the hospital to, through the whole process, I had people coming in and praying with me that we couldn't even figure out how I got on their prayer list. Like, I don't know who these preachers that were coming up there and praying with me are like, hey, somebody put you on our prayer churches from all over DFW. And I was just like, I had no idea. I was like, what in the world? So Brother Rick and Ann would come up there and visit with me and stuff like that. And just so many people at fellowship came up there, and it was just awesome. And so, day 9's coming, and I'm like, I'm doing really good. And they were all just like, you don't even look sick. Like, all the nurses were just like, everybody on the floor is just like, what in the world is going on with this girl? Day 9 comes, I'm better. 10, better. 11, better. Never, just every day was better and better. And they would come in there. So about day 20, they're like, hey, everything that could go right with you has gone right. And I'm like, praise the Lord. I'm like, thank
Yeah.
goodness. And I was out of there. I was out of there in like 26 days, and came out of the hospital, and I was living at a place close to there. And then there was a ministry that was across the street called Interfaith Housing Coalition. And they took in basically families that were about to be homeless right before they go onto the street. And you either had to be a single person with kids or a licensed married person with children, and you get a free apartment and all that. Well, they had known me from living across the street, and so within a month, I started working there, and they let me live there, because by this time, Lexi's dad had gone downhill and all kinds of other stuff. That's a whole, I don't even want to get into that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so at this point, it's just me and Lexi by this time. So I'm doing this, with my family, my mom there and my family. And so within a month of being out of the hospital from the transplant, I'm working in the daytime, I work in the office and I do phone interviews with the people that are applying for the place. They come in, I would drug test them because they had to be clean. And then at evening, I work their children's program for the after schoolers, because their kids are in these school programs while they're trying to find jobs and things like that. So it exposed me to that part of that type of setting, and I loved it. And then I ended up moving to Forney, and that's when I came back and was back at fellowship and after my transplant. And that's whenever I saw you guys all the time, because I had, I'd wear a wig to church, and the only place I wore a wig maybe twice ever. Otherwise, I just wore the little cotton caps over my head. And then once I had that much hair, I was like, no more hats. And I left it like that. But from there, I was off of all my anti-rejection medicines within 4 months. And I went back to the doctor, every 6 months for the first year or 2 years. And then I think it was year 3, they said just once a year. And then basically after the 5th year, they were like, just your yearly checkup with your regular doctor. That's it. And, my hair came back in super curly. It wasn't curly before. And I got better and better. And less than a year after my transplant, because I had been applying for DPD when I found out I was sick. So I had to make that call and tell them, hey, just pull my application because I just found out I was dying. And they're like, what? They're like, well, good luck, and like call back later if you're going to want to be a police officer. I was like, yeah. Okay. So I'd always wanted to be a mesquite officer because I grew up there. And so I ended up testing for them a year later after my transplant. Didn't prepare for it, passed the written, went on to all their physical stuff. And the very last thing they do is a dummy drag. And it had been raining, and I slipped like 3 times because it was so muddy. And I went over by 6 seconds. And they were like, come back. We test every month. At the time there was not a ton of females, doing that. And they're like, you will pass. No problem. Like, you just slipped, and like, but we can't let you pass it. I'm like, okay. And by this time, it was pretty much me raising Lexi. And so I was like, you know what? I prayed. I was like, I gotta raise my baby. Like, I don't want to, get killed on the job and not be here for my child. Like, I didn't live to die that way for my child. So as she grew up, and I was like, once she gets older, if I still want to do that with my life, then I'll do it then. And right around 2011, it was like end of 2010, it became more and more a push for me and me. And I was like, I really still want to be a police officer. And so 2011, I started looking into it more and then started applying places in 2012 and then got hired with Dart PD for in 2013 and was there almost for 6 years. And then now I've been with Louisville for 4 years. So
It's incredible. I just think the whole, I mean, whole deal. I was going to show you this too because I was searching this deal, but this is out of the message, and it just says trust. You know, it's the same passage as the Proverbs 3 through 8, but but trust God from the bottom of your heart. Don't try to
mhm.
figure out everything on your own. Listen for God's voice in everything you do, everywhere you go. And you may have read this too, but He's the one who will keep you on track. You know. But then it goes on. And it didn't. The last part of it. It says, where'd it go? The last part says, I don't know why it didn't print that. But I love the way this reads. I'm gonna show it to you. Hang on, let me jump it in here real quick. Um, save. Show. Um, don't assume that you know it all. Run to God, run from it. And then look at this. Your body will glow with health, and your very bones will vibrate with life.
That's the message version.
Yeah, that's the message version.
That's
So, and if you
awesome.
guys that are listening you guys that are listening to this, if you make it to the end here, this is out of the message. But the whole idea of like, I just thought when you read that, I'm like, my gosh, you know, and I think it goes back to the fact that, you know, we all have those moments, you know, as you're going and you're moving forward, you know, these things come back and they were like for me, there was a book called 50 Days of Hope. And then there was a guy named Greg Murtha who wrote a book called Out of the Blue that I knew, and just all these different things that helped me, you know. But even like for the whole bone marrow thing, that hit me hard because obviously that was what, um, you know, any blood cancer is it got something to do with your marrow. You know, there's
Mhm.
something there that's going on because that's the life source of our bodies. You know, that
Yeah.
gives
It
us what
is
we
your immune
need to.
system. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's everything that you need, and you know, and I think the very idea that your bones will vibrate with life, you know, it's like, I thought that was so powerful. And I think, you know, those people that are listening or watching and making it to this point, I think that this whole story, hopefully listening to the whole journey, I mean, it's awesome. I mean, it's incredible just to hear the path and the different nuances and the shifts and the changes and, you know, all these divine moments that you experience that we all experience. We all have the opportunity to see these things. It's
Mhm.
just a matter we have to open our eyes. I will never forget we were living in Little Rock, Arkansas, and my wife Donna, who's always been so attuned to so many things, you know, around us. And I remember a moment um, on the front porch of our little house that we had there in Mapleville, Arkansas, and we had this little white fence, you know, little white, you know, whatever guard, little like a
Yeah.
fence on the porch there, and this bird just came and lit, you know, right in front of us, you know, while we were standing there, and we had been talking about that, and she was just talking about how she saw things and recognized things, and I think so often we are not aware and we're not attentive, and um, and I think too, going back to what we said earlier, it's like those moments come more readily when you're not looking for them, but but they just happen, you know. But the
Mhm.
way they happen is because, like you said earlier, and as we're talking, as you know, you're already moving that direction, and it's almost like there's moments that encourage you to keep moving that direction. Don't quit. Don't stop. And that applies to everything: health and
Yeah.
wellness, diet, um, our mentality, reading, journaling. You know what we do with our time, what we watch, everything, all that stuff, the discipline that we need, you know, that we're given as we make those decisions to change things about our lives spiritually, emotionally, relationally, physically, whatever the case may be. then there's these little moments that encourage us to keep coming that we would never see if we didn't make the decision in the first place.
Yeah.
And so I just when you shared that while ago that verse, I thought, my goodness. I mean, I'm just looking at it again. It's like your bones will vibrate with life, and that's literally what the marrow does. It
Mhm.
creates life,
Life.
in our bodies, our red blood cells, our white blood cells, our platelets, and everything that we need that creates antibodies and protects us and gives us and helps our blood thicken when we have a cut, that kind of stuff. It's like all that stuff. It's the literally lifeblood of our system,
Yeah.
and yours was done, mine was contaminated and
Hmm.
whatever the case may be. And there's so many people um, that in the blood is such a big deal, and of course that
Oh
takes us
yeah.
all kinds of, that, that
All the
takes us all
relevance
kinds
of
of,
that. Hmm.
yeah, it takes us all kinds of places, right? So, but anyway, listen, I just can't thank you enough. This has been freaking awesome. I was so excited to have you on here because one of what a huge encouragement you were to me, but then as you've just kind of walked through your whole story and this whole journey, it's even bigger to me, and so man, I hope and pray that we have, it's like I've told people before, and I love the fact that now you've got this you can share with people and whoever's listening or watching, hopefully they can find encouragement to know that wherever you are, they are in their journey, just like we're in our journey.
Hmm.
You just take it a day at a time and start making the choices, to believe in something greater than yourself, and and to know that, you know, for us, obviously, that God is there, in the middle of it all. And I love what my friend David, I mentioned him earlier, but he was like, I believe in God. I know He's there. I'm just really upset about what's
Hmm.
happened.
Yep.
And I think, but as he moves forward and we all move forward, that there's moments that will be there if we're looking, and if we're aware. And so anyway, that verse that was amazing. It
Yeah.
our bones vibrate to life is crazy.
And it's, and seeing some of the people you've talked to and people and what you're going through. And then, when I was listening to Brian about Lauren and just remembering all of that, and I know where my head was at during that. And it was just, you know, so much hope and pain at the same time. And as it wasn't that long after, that definitely, pretty close to after my experience, and just feeling that angst and desire for them to have what they wanted for their baby, and just seeing and watching that. And then I'll never forget at Lauren's funeral, or I guess, yeah, at the funeral, or celebration of life service. And after, I walked past Lauren and hugging Patty, she hugged me, and she was like, ugh, she hugged me really, really hard and for a long time. And she knew a lot of my story. And she was just like, I'm very thankful that you made it. And I was just like, oh my gosh. I was like, oh,
Yeah,
I knew what she meant. It was just like, I couldn't
yeah,
even, like, you can't say anything back at that time, because like, you've expressed, it's like people don't know what to say in those times. And I know you can't say anything. You got, they can feel that you love them. You hug them, you love on them. And then what they
yeah,
need, they will let you know what they need, because
yeah,
you can't know what I'll never, I mean, I can't know that. And not until I had my own child, and Lexi's had some autoimmune issues, not anything life threatening. But before you know what's going on, I mean, I had to take her to children's many times, and I just had flashbacks, and we didn't know anything was going on at that time. And she 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 definitely tends to go the worst route quickly. But
yeah,
once I was experiencing that and watching her go through some pain and ulcers and things like that she suffered with, and it's all an autoimmune problem. I knew what my mom was going through at that point because I used to just talk
Yeah.
about it like it was nothing, and my mom, be bothered by it and be like, "Quit it talking about it like you don't understand what I went through." And that I do. I just, don't, not until I had Lexi going through some stuff did I understand how painful that was for her, and
Yeah. It's a whole
I was
nother
always
ball
pushing
game.
it. So,
Yeah.
but I appreciate you letting me tell it,
Oh,
and
listen, thank you so much. I just love it. I mean, like I said, I was excited to have you on. Thank you for being encouragement to me and helping me in such a huge way. I mean, it really, really made a difference. I remember calling you several times, and it just made a big difference. And I think it's good to you've brought in so many different aspects of it that have been good. I think for just to share with people as far as how your journey was all about, what you went through. But again, I think it goes back to, and it's so encouraging to me because I feel like who we were becoming and who we are becoming today, all of us,
mhm,
whether you're listening or you're watching, but for me and you as well, it's like who we were becoming, in those changes and decisions were preparatory for what we were going to face. And,
and
you
22
know,
years from now, what
yeah,
you'll be able to share. So,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll be 77. So at that point, it's crazy, but but I think that's the other thing. And I mean, we can stop after this, but you just have a sense of urgency, right? It's like this life is short, and
mhm,
and love people and let people know you love them. And I tell people all the time, if someone pops in your mind, text them, reach
yeah,
out to them, something. Don't just let it pass. And because you never know, you just never know what tomorrow's going to bring. And you pray and believe that it's going to be great, but you just don't know. And and I
definitely.
think I think go back to this is that people struggle with the fact of you know God with God in the midst of things like that, but it's that fact that He's there and we don't have all the answers. There's no way we'll understand all the answers, at this point until we get further down the road. Then we can look back and we can see clearly, everything that was happening, and it makes a big difference. And so that's the whole thing. Fight like a freak, and the freak cast is like choose to be an ardent enthusiast in the middle of whatever it is, not fake,
Right.
but just just reality of it all. So I was going to show this last thing for you go because this is for you guys that are watching. This is now. So anyway,
Is us.
yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
and and you you've reached so many people in different ways, and so I definitely, when I think of like music ministry, things like that, you were always connected in that for me, and Donnie was as well, and just that then your kids and the way y'all taught them, and that's just amazing to me. And so now you use every since I've known you and anything about you, I feel like whatever you are going through in that moment, you use it to minister. And I don't think there's anything more that anybody can do than that. And that is what God wants us to do. So
Yeah,
regardless of what struggles you're going through, and even if people don't know every detail of it, you make the effort to reach out to that group of people and try to make a difference and let them know there is somebody out there struggling and doing those things. And just I didn't really think of it all the time this way, but I came off patrol 2 years ago, and I only answer. I'm one of the mental health officers now, so I
hmm,
only go to suicide attempts, psychiatric calls, and then I follow up with these people. So that I 100% know that the things that I've been through and the people that I've
hmm,
spoke to, and when I was on DART trains, I had a lot of youth I dealt with on there, and then a lot of people just literally in the ghetto and go through these things, and they see me come up, and we start talking, and they have no clue what my life consisted of, and they begin to talk about things they've been through. And then when I'm able to share with them what I've been through, it blew them away. I mean, they're like, what? I would never know that you've been through this and that, because there's so much more. But and
yeah,
and so if you're open to people and you're open to sharing hope, that's what people are looking for.
yeah.
They're looking for that hope, and whether
Agreed.
they fully believe in Jesus and what we say about him, they know, they can see in our eyes that our experience was real, and they're intrigued and they want to know that, and that's what leads people. That's how God uses it. So
Yeah.
your experiences have to be shared that way, because, and if you can do it through your job, I mean, that's why I love my job. I'm like,
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity every day, somewhere if we're available, to be able to share something. So I think that's part of the journey, big time. So anyway,
yep.
well, listen, we love you guys. Thank you so much again, and thanks for um, just sharing with us again tonight. So I'm grateful for it all. It's awesome. So
Oh, amen to that.
all right, all right. Well, thanks again. I'm gonna let you go, and we'll hang tight. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us tonight and the Freakcast. And man, well, that was awesome. Gosh, that was awesome. I just enjoyed it so much. Make sure that you go to fightlikeafreak.com and subscribe if you will. We're trying to build that, and then as well, you can follow us on Instagram at Stephen Carroll 77, TikTok same thing, and then you can find us there as well. So anyway, glad you joined in tonight. We're gonna leave you, and just hope that you have a great evening. Join back with us. We got some other things coming up, and we'll be sharing more stories. And remember, man, that your story matters, and every story matters. And you've got one, and people need to hear it. People want to hear it, and your story can help change people's lives, just like Tennille shared with us tonight. All right. So, hey, you guys take care, and we will see you next time. We'll take you out like we always do.